So I move that we open the meeting. How about that, huh?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, Jean?
Aye.
Neil, aye. Carol? Courtney?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
All right, the motion carries. Okay, so is there anything that anybody would like to add to the agenda that could not have been anticipated 48 hours in advance? Music to my ears. All right, let's see. Why don't I dive into our little poetry reading, which is, unless if somebody has something to share, does anybody have anything?
No, sorry.
That's okay. I've got something cool, so I figured I'm glad that you don't in this particular instance. All right, so this is not poetry, but it is from this book that I was thinking about as I saw it on my shelf today. And it is called The Book of British Birds. Sorry, there it is. And it's an old-timey book from England, and it has really amazing painted illustrations in it. It's just pure art. And the reason I wanted to read it tonight is because I was thinking about the relationship that human beings have to the natural world and how that's expressed in things as supposedly objective as bird books. So if you go and read a modern bird book, generally speaking, it's very antiseptic and scientific. You know, this bird weighs this much and they do this and that and the other thing. Well, this old bird book is really quite something different. And so I was just going to read you the first two paragraphs of the description of what is a Pacific, which is a red-throated loon, but they call in that part of the world, in Europe, they call them red-throated divers, which is just a better name anyway, as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, they say, the courtship ceremonies of ducks, bizarre though many of them are, have nothing to equal the displays of the red-throated diver. Up to 4 divers race across the water with bodies half submerged and heads and necks pointed forwards and upwards, looking like the long extinct plesiosaur. As well as swimming, they sometimes patter along the surface, beating the water with their wings, and during those courtship displays, they utter metallic sounding cries, sometimes starting with a long, loud, mewing wail. This wail, which is also the bird's cry at other times, apart from a quack, 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 given in flight, earned it the old country nickname of rain goose. People believed that when they heard the cry, rain was on the way. Another country name, sprat loon, comes from its feeding habits, though the red-throated diver eats many kinds of fish other than sprats. And it goes on, but that's where they start. And it's like, it's colorful. In my mind, there's an affection for the bird there that oftentimes in more modern texts is missing. And I feel like this is sort of my bailiwick in terms of my environmental work, but it's the expression of the human being's relationship with the more than human world that I feel like if sort of real care and affection and love isn't in the relationship and it's purely scientific, will never solve environmental problems solely that way. There has to be the passion. So anyway, I wanted to read from that. All right, so
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. All right, so 7:20. We've got an RDA for Leland Mill Bog Bridge.
We do, and that is going to be continued, if you would.
Oh, yes. So, well, it's not a hearing, so do we need to continue it, or are we just going to put it on the next agenda?
It is a hearing.
It is? Sorry.
Yeah.
All right.
We post it.
So we need to open it and then continue it. Okay, so but this is all right, so we're opening this hearing into this RDA for Leland Mill Pond Bog Bridge. Say that 10 times fast. And I move that we continue it until February 17th at what time?
March
Actually,
3rd.
we want to continue it to March 3rd.
Oh, it says that, March 3rd. At what time?
7:20.
Great. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, any other discussion? All right, all those in favor, Jean?
Aye.
Neil, aye. Carol? Courtney?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
For the record, Carol, you were muted, but I saw you
Yes,
say
I just
aye.
realized that. I unmuted aye.
Thank you. I'm just like, see your mouth move, and I'm like, okay, that counts.
Yes.
But no, we have to do it verbally. Okay, thank you for that. All right, sorry about that. Okay, do we, well, we've got 4 minutes until we have this request for the minor modification, so I think we should wait and just do it right on the nose. So is there anything we can squeeze in 4 minutes?
The warrant, maybe?
Yes, there's no warrant this week. Check.
And no minutes either.
Wow.
And no, and we're skipping the fees question.
We're skipping
So
the question.
discussions are done.
Wow. Well, again, we should wait. So
Administrative approvals and site
Yeah,
questions.
there you go.
None for this week.
Isn't there one?
for Oldfield,
Excuse me. For Oldfield is an addition and it's outside of our jurisdiction.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
okay. So we've got 3 minutes. Are there any sort of site issues or anything like that that we can do quickly?
I am going to probably address this again later because I told the abutter that, not the abutter, the resident of 45 Maple Street that we'll be talking about it at later. But
Okay.
what it is about, I'll give you a heads up, is it's just an emergency certification that I'm hoping to do, but it's for what I'm counting as 13 trees, including a couple of multi-stem. And since that's more than usual, that's why I'm bringing it to you.
All right. So we've got 2 minutes. What should we talk about?
It's not on the agenda. It's hard to talk about it.
We should have a moment of silence.
2 moments of silence. Okay, well, let's wait 2 minutes.
Let's reflect on the diver bird, the
The
English diver.
red-throated diver. Here, hold on. Let me see if I can.
You
Here's a
could
cool
read some
one.
more.
I am. I'm going
Neil,
to.
Neil, let me mention to you that when I was, I don't know, 13, somebody bought me a book from about that era about American birds that has similarly wonderfully personal kinds of descriptions. So I'm happy to bring that to a future meeting instead of a poetry.
That'd be
reading.
great. Here's a good one about the swift. No birds are more aerial in their habits than swifts. Their legs have become so weak because they are so seldom used that the birds are helpless and easily caught once on the ground. But swifts never alight on the ground except by accident. They feed on the wing, sometimes mate on the wing, and even sleep on the wing.
Wow.
At dusk, swifts circle higher and higher until they disappear from sight. It used to be thought that they returned after dark to roost at their nests, but it is now known that those which are not incubating eggs or brooding young remain aloft until sunrise, probably catnapping on currents of rising air between short spells of flapping to gain height.
Wow.
So cool. To countrymen, the swift was once known as the devil bird because of its habit of flying screaming round houses during late spring and early summer evenings. It is one of the latest migrants to arrive and one of the earliest to go. Few can be seen before the last few days of April or after the middle of August. Swifts appear to mate to pair for life, and they have 2 courtship displays. On the nest, mating occurs after mutual crooning and preening. In the air, there is a spectacular chase before the birds mate on the wing. It's really cool. So, all right, it's 7:25. So we've got a request to amend for 65. Request for minor modification to the order of conditions for 65. So a request to amend. So does somebody who's going to sort of tell us what's going on? Anna, or does that make sense? Or should we have Mr. Murchison since he's here?
Mr. Murchison can start and I'll fill in the gaps and if there are any.
Okay.
So in today's world, we don't always have good news, but I come with good news tonight in this request. So back in July, when you gave us the notice of intent and the order of conditions, we committed to you that we would do everything possible to move the wells further away from the wetlands. And the good news is we've done so. In the case of the well that is for house number 3, that well is moving completely out of your jurisdiction, out of the buffer zone. And in the case of house number 4, I don't recall, maybe Anna can help me here with the dimension, but there was a substantial move further away from the wetlands, and that well is now located approximately 87 feet or 88 feet thereabouts from the wetlands. So both of those two requests for minor modifications, I think, are good news in terms of the resources. And the third piece of the request for a minor modification is that obviously we all knew back in July that there would be I'm surprised I missed this, frankly, but we all knew there would be a water line that would need to run from the well to any new home that would be constructed. And now that we've moved it, that water line will only need to be about 12 feet in length in the buffer zone. So from 88 feet from the wetlands to get out, 12 feet to get outside of your jurisdiction. The ditch that the water line will be laid in will be dug with a very small mini excavator, which I've provided a photograph of that to the commission. That, as you probably all know by now, those holes need to be 4 feet deep and 2 feet wide. And I anticipate that the work will all be done in one day. It's in a disturbed field environment. And it's our intent to reseed immediately after laying down that line. And that's all I have. Did I miss anything, Anna?
That all sounds good, as we discussed. I'm going to share my screen if I may. And so this is tiny, but what we're looking at here is the plan on the left is the July plan that was in the 65 Farm Road NOI. And on the right is a more recent plan that Mr. Murchison was referring to. And just trying to make gallery so I can see the people and the graph and the graphic. So really, you know, I can tell that it's really tiny, but I hope that you can tell I highlighted on both sides. You've got the wetland line, you've got the 50, whoops, with the yellow highlighting, the wetland line towards the right of each graphic, the 50 no alteration zone, and the 100. And so this on the left, you've got, I'll make it a tiny bit bigger. There we go. Is that, you seeing that a little bit bigger, tiny bit bigger?
Yes.
So as you can see in the July one, both of the proposed wells were between the 50 and the 100, and both of them were pretty close to the 50 relatively. And there is no connection line in the picture, in the plan. Whereas if we go to this newer plan, the well number 3, as Mr. Murchison said, is far beyond the 100-foot buffer. And the well for lot 4, this purple one, is now it's more towards the midway between, well, it appears on the plan that it's just from eyeballing it, but as Mr. Murchison said, it's about 87 feet from the line, from the wetland line, but it's past the midway of, you know, between the 50 and the 100 is what I'm trying to say. And then you see this well line that will go to the this gray dwelling, proposed dwelling on the left side. So that is what is proposed. I am suggesting that it be a minor change, and I'm going to switch I'm going to stop share, but open up something else for you. And that is going to be the section, this is also in the Dropbox, section of Sherborn regulations related to modifications. And so here that is. And also tiny again, but we can fix that. So the things that the commission is, according to the regulations, needs to take into consideration in deciding that it's a minor change is the extent of the modification, the proximity to wetland, and the type of equipment required for construction, which is why we asked Mr. Murchison to describe, as he has, and he has also in writing, described the equipment. And so that's why I'm recommending that it be a minor change. As I said, this is also in Dropbox. Below that in our regulations, there's this description of moderate change, which would be the step up. And it describes these things, 1 through 7, which, you know, if any of them, then it may require a moderate change, and it may require different treatment. So I'm going to stop share because that's, you all have that. But I think I'm done with my presentation to you of what we're looking at.
Can I ask a question? Given the new location for the one that's remaining in the outer buffer, is there any difference in terms of tree removal, access, anything like that?
There are no trees anywhere nearby.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just don't have a.
And the access, I believe, maybe Mr. Murchison, you can, there's a gravel driveway existing already. So is that going to be the access?
The access is very comfortable, and the truck, the way the well is built, and you may remember it from our conversations about digging the well on 53. About almost 30 feet long, but the truck will be sitting at 88 feet, and then, you know, going further away from the.
So there's no change in equipment. There's no change in access. No change in terms of vegetation removal. Okay.
Correct. It's an open field.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Michael, what's your question?
Seems to make sense to me that this is a minor modification. I would just have the issues. I'm trying to think of whether in the existing order that we have the idea that any of this work is done under dry conditions with some plywood or some sort of mats to protect compression.
My memory,
had that before.
My memory, Michael, is that you did put that in the order of conditions, but I'm not looking at it right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to search it right now, but I would just, that if we make this change, that we would put that same condition on the work being done for the pipeline, so the water line, and that we put in those, that it's basically dry conditions with the plywood and the mat.
I have no objection to that request.
And otherwise, I guess, do we have and I guess you're going to have to submit, I didn't see in the Dropbox, maybe I missed it, a revised plan. That other than those little sketches there, about whether there'd be a revised overall plan.
We did submit a revised plan, yes.
Okay, I guess I couldn't tell which file it was in.
Well,
it's not
it's
actually in there. I apologize.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize.
Okay.
But we do have it.
Good. And as long as that's accurate, and we put with those conditions on doing the new line, it certainly seems to be a less of an impact on wetland issues.
Yeah. Okay. Jean?
I didn't have a chance to examine the plan closely, but it's level ground. Is that right? And
That's correct, yes.
There's like there's a 1 foot change. It's practically level. There's,
Okay, and in the order of conditions, I'm assuming it's describing how, when you put the well in, how you would be stabilizing, what seed you would be using. And I think we need to have it in the amendment that, what is going to be planted and when, and things like, if it's not growing season, then it needs to be stabilized temporarily in some other means.
Yeah, Gene, I would just suggest that the treatment of the disturbance for the well line be treated the same as the disturbance for the well itself. I think that makes sense.
Okay. I also, I wanted to bring this up, ask about it. I don't know if it was a conversation or an email. I'm sorry, there's been a lot going on. You have mowed the field, correct? You mowed it last fall?
We mowed it last fall, and it certainly has been mowed typically multiple times, according
Right.
to Jean Elias, under her ownership
I
per
know
year.
that.
I
I was
only,
asking about your
sorry.
most recent mowing, because I'm wondering what's become of the wetland delineation stakes, and can they be put back in place if they're not there?
Yes, absolutely. I've spoken with Anna about that, and it's our intent. Obviously, we're not going to do it with a foot of snow on the ground, but
Right.
certainly before any work commences.
Please put the flags back before you do any of the work.
Absolutely.
It's part of
Yep.
your order. And I have it on good authority that you actually can hammer a stake into the ground right now. So you might not have.
Really? Maybe today. I tried it a couple of days ago. It didn't work out so well for me, but I believe you.
So please, once you have the the wetland reflagged, can you let Anna know so she can come out and take a look? Thank you.
Okay. Any other commission members or members of the public want to comment or ask questions? Yes, Mr. Moore.
Hi, good evening. Brian Moore, 49 Farm Road. We're right down the street from this project. And I've asked and communicated with your board about having some time to speak tonight related to this project at large. And I don't know what the proper forum is. If you're not voting on these tonight, I think that a lot of what I have to say, I'd like to say before the commission actually agrees and votes on this minor modification. I think it's very germane. So I don't know whether we should wait until my allotted time and vote after that, or whether I should speak now.
Well, I would say that we have given you allotted time on the agenda a little bit later, 8:05, I think. And I'm aware of just sort of generally the input you'd like to give us. I don't know that it is, I don't, if you can tell me why you think it's relevant to, I mean, there are changes that have been requested, we've vetted, they meet the specification or the conditions for a minor modification in our regulations. And I don't think there's anything, I mean, if there's something specific about these particular things, the well line, the movement of the wells, and the conditions that we've just discussed that you think are, that you'd like to ask questions about, I think that's appropriate. I think to go into more generally what concerns you have, I think is not appropriate. So,
Okay, well then I'll limit my, if it's okay, I'll limit my questions, those that I think speak to exactly what you just said. I'll do my
Okay.
best to keep it within those confines. So
sure, and I'll help
first
you.
one, thank you. The first ones were that the two projects are the third or second, third, fourth, fifth project of this phase project for development of a larger parcel. And I was wondering if the commission has changed their opinion about whether this should be treated as part of a phased project, which the Wetlands Protection Act says you should not be allowed to do phasing of projects. You should only do a single filing. So I was wondering if the commission has given that any further thought.
We haven't discussed it, but I think that certainly goes, like, again, these are sort of conditioned projects, well installations and that sort. And so I think from that perspective, we're just looking at the conditioned project that's been approved and looking to see what the changes are. So though we have not discussed this notion of whether this is really a phase single project or not, I think in this context, it's not applicable.
Okay, and the next question is, if the commission comes into a new understanding about where the boundaries of the wetlands are or other resource areas that are to be protected, is there an opportunity for them to claw back on the order conditions that was issued and reissue it, or bring the applicant back in front of the board to hear those concerns?
Well, I think the question, I'm not
We
sure.
can do that later. I don't.
Right.
Later
I
too.
don't think it's particularly relevant here, because this is really just about the request for minor modification or a request for amendment, and we're taking it up as a minor change. So again, yes, I think that's maybe part of a larger concern, but not particularly relevant here.
Okay, I'm just gonna put a star next to that one. The lot lines that are in the two applications are not currently on record with Middlesex County Registry of Deeds. The lot lines that are presented in the applicant's plans do not line up with any known lots in the town of Sherborn as of today. And is it typical for the Conservation Commission to issue permits such as this for lots which have yet to be recorded at the registry or even approved by the planning board?
Well, I mean, maybe some other commissioners with more experience than I can comment on this. But let me give you two responses. One is, if our paperwork is in order for a property and there's a file number associated with the work, then we go ahead and take it up. In terms of where the property boundaries are drawn, whether it's registered or not, it's not really our purview, right? Like that's a planning board or a zoning board or somebody else. It's not what we do. The other thing I would say is, again, this particular request for amendment is a very targeted thing on an approved order. Now, if it comes into play later that the order is somehow, there's a superseding order that comes out of DEP or some other mechanism by which that's rendered moot or inapplicable or not, just invalid in some way, fine. But specifically right now, and again, you sort of are going to have an opportunity to talk about some of this later, but right now, this is really just about whether or not the installation of the line or the movement of the wells you have concerns or questions about specifically.
Okay, thank you. Does the applicant's, does this approval give the applicant the right to move what is right now a gravel cart path and create a whole new driveway for multiple houses where one doesn't exist right now?
I mean, no, because that's not a change that anybody's stated is occurring. We've talked about an existing access way and only the changes that have been discussed tonight. So no, it would not.
Okay, and I think the other ones, I think we could talk about later. My concerns are that with regards to both of these applications, that one of the areas subject to protection under the Act is areas that are subject to routine flooding. I forwarded to the commission members and to Anna the other day screenshots from a simple Mass GIS ortho imagery program, which shows how frequently that area floods. And I read the DEP guidance for demarcating wetlands, and it says that, while use of vegetation, hydric soils are definitely a couple of avenues one can take. These other avenues, people should consider using avenues such as ortho imagery to confirm full extent flooding. So I don't know if anyone wants to speak to, with some regularity, that area floods. I think our other neighbors who have been on these meetings before have spoken about that in disbelief that area could be so small as it was flagged. So I don't know if the commission has given that any further consideration.
So that, again, I think that's something we should take up in this other discussion we've set aside for a little bit later, because that's not specific or targeted to this particular request for change.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Carol?
Yeah, so there are a few things that I want to bring up. One is, my recollection is that when we permitted the wells, one of the objections we had at the time was that we were permitting wells without seeing the home site at all. And now we're seeing plans that actually show the home or partially, and show the septic system for one of the homes. And I'm also listening to Mr. Moore's questions. And while I understand that on a strictly procedural point of view, we can say, this is, a minor modification. I think my question to other members of the commission is, at what point do we have an opportunity to address some of these other issues? If, in other words, we may move forward now and say, okay, we will permit this, but then at what point can we address these other issues? The other thing I would ask is, to me, there's a question of what Mr. Moore said about phased projects. If this turns out that this entire project is many homes with many septic systems, we've had a situation with a 40B in the past where we had concern about nitrate loading into the wetlands. And the topography of the site means that, the wetland areas are in the lowlands, of course. And so there is that potential. I think I'm just raising a flag that we brought up in the beginning, which is that we're being asked to permit these wells without any further context, or with limited further context. And I would suggest that we investigate some of the questions that Mr. Moore is bringing up, rather than automatically going ahead and allowing this modification.
So what I would say to you is this, is that we are not automatically going forward and allowing this modification.
Well, that was a poor choice of words, but you understand what I mean.
No, but I think it's important to get that right, because I think from a regulatory perspective, there were things that were requested when some of the aspects of this project came before us, like separating the septic from the house. And we said, we don't do that. We've never done it. We're not doing it here. When we did the wells initially, that was something that we agreed as a commission we were going to do. And we noted at the time, yes, that it was a little bit unusual, but we went forward and did it. We've conditioned the project. And while some of Mr. Moore's comments or concerns are certainly valid, and they're things that pertain to the jurisdiction, and there's this notion of phased project, but I think that procedurally speaking, we have to approach that in a certain way. We can't just go back to an approved project and say, well, we don't want to approve it now because of what's come to light. Because what would happen, honestly, is that I think Mr. Moore, if there's things that are relevant to our jurisdiction, he would bring that stuff up. Frankly, he would appeal the order. And I know that there's an issue about the denial of an appeal because of some timing. And we can get to that when we get to this 8 o'clock stuff that's the discussion about the abutters' concerns. But I think that there's just a procedure it has to be followed. And if in the future we don't want to do it this way, or we want to talk more generally about phasing, that's fine. I think those are all valid concerns. I think we're all on the same page in terms of not wanting, sort of a backdoor to cumulative impacts or any of these kinds of things. But I think these particular wells and the fact that they're approved projects, I don't see a mechanism, but unless there's been some misrepresentation, that there's a mechanism to go back and revisit them, and especially in the context of a request for this minor modification. I just think it's its own thing.
So my question to you, Neil, is at some point, if we, learn that this is a bigger project, can you tell me where in the process do we then address some of the concerns that are raised?
Well, I think
one of the things that's happening here, I think that some of us are aware, is that there is a potential for this to become, developed under the open space bylaw, or there's been some possibility of that. Yes. And that typically our regulations don't deal with that. I mean, that doesn't typically come before us.
Right.
So, whereas 40Bs have come before us and then they're regulated in a certain way by the state, we're kind of in a little bit more unknown territory here.
I agree with you, because I think with the open space subdivision that they changed recently, right? And this is going to, 65 Farm Road is, I think, coming in under that eventually. I think if our regulations are lacking in dealing with the, what sort of unique challenges, jurisdictional issues that raises, then we may need to sort of look at our regulations and see, do we need to add things? I just don't think that in this context, it's appropriate to, I just don't think we can go backwards, that's all. So, I mean, that's just my perspective. If other commissioners want to say anything, and I know that Mr. Murchison, Mr. Moore, you both have your hands raised, but I think Mr. Murchison had his hand raised first, so.
Thank you, Neil. I just wanted to correct something or perhaps provide you with information. It's not germane to this issue at hand, but since you said it, I feel like I need to speak to it. So I apologize that it's off the topic of your vote, but it is on the topic of something you just said. I can tell this commission that I am no longer considering the use of the open space subdivision law to further develop this property. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moore?
I think I'll just reserve any comments I have for the 8 o'clock slot in the interest of moving this forward.
Okay.
you.
Michael?
I'll just sort of second most of what you said, Neil, in that I feel like the issue of phased projects, which we had problems with in the very beginning, but we embarked down this path of approving the wells on their own. I think that at the time, we didn't see anything, even the plans that I would like to have, if we get revised plans, that the revised plans just reflect the change there, because I don't know if those lots are even in place. We approved the project without lot lines there other than 65, and that the plans that we get do not include any of that, because none of that is part of what we already approved. I think the issue of phased work, we should just think about it more next time. We did it, but we made a decision back then to embark on this knowing these issues, and we did that. I don't think this is the setting, as Neil said. I agree with him that we can deal with that. If there are issues around some other cumulative impacts, we will deal with the things as a project. If it comes in house by house by house, we'll have to think about how it comes into us next in terms of whatever Mr. Murchison decides to move forward with, and what pattern of NOIs he plans to give us, but we'll certainly have to think about that then. And also that, and so we would look at those, deal with that then. And now and if there's issues around the wetland delineation, whether we got it wrong or not, that's another issue that I'm not sure whether there is a mechanism to change that or revisit that we can look into, but not at this point.
And right, so that again that's the 805 thing. So I want to I know there's two more people with their hands up, Carol and then Courtney, but I want to steer this back onto the requests for the putting in the line and the moving of the wells. So if anybody has any comments on that, great. Otherwise, I think we should vote on this and take up the rest of this discussion as part of the other thing that's coming up on our agenda shortly.
Well, Neil, you can move the vote if you want to.
Well, no, I want to give people the opportunity to comment on this particular aspect of what is before us, this agenda item. So I'm saying, if you have things to add here, we have the time to add them. We have 5 minutes. If you don't, then let's take it up in some other context. So Carol, did you have something you wanted to add with respect to these changes requested?
I'm not sure. I was only going to say to Mike's comment that I am concerned about the wetland delineation issue. Whether that can be procedurally addressed at this point, I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Okay. All right, Courtney, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I agree with you and Michael. I think this is a minor modification. One of the wells is moving out of jurisdiction and the other is moving further away from the resource area and decreasing the disturbance.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Horsley, did you want to add something?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief. I do have a couple of comments which I think are appropriate later on if I'm understanding the schedule. But if if the commission is about to approve this change, I guess I would just ask one question, which might be a comment or question. The way I read the notice of intent is for permission to drill a well, not to withdraw X amount of water from that well, which might impact the wetland, which is what I want to speak about later. But they're obviously closely tied together, and I'm wondering if one is implicit from the other. The way I read the notice of intent, it strictly talks about drilling the well and not withdrawing water. The drilling of the well, I don't think will cause impacts to the wetland, but I think withdrawing water, depending on how much, certainly could. And so I'm not sure whether, if your current deliberation includes a carte blanche right to withdraw water from whatever water they can from the well, or whether this is to be clear in your decision that this is only to drill the well and not to extract water from it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Horsley. And commissioners with better memory than me can certainly comment, but I believe that it's only to drill the well, not in terms of any kind of extraction.
No,
And
I
that's
think
my
that
understanding. Thank you for that clarification.
For a single family home, right?
it's for a single family home. What I would answer to that is that I think when you're given permission to drill the well, you're given permission to use it. But that in our case, what the same issue we did at 55 is that we basically permitted the drilling of a well for single family homes. And that we've historically not, I mean, it's an issue that maybe we should take up at another discussion of whether the idea that that a well, we've generally taken the position that a single family well does not have, and the withdrawals from it do not impact the nearby adjacent wetlands. We've implicitly, and I am not sure whether it's part of the regs at the state level even, that there's any mechanism to say that the well withdrawal from for a single family home, which is what we specified, that we can have a basis for saying that's an impact on the wetlands.
Well, I think you can do it if you want to argue that it's changing the hydrology of the wetland, because that's I mean, and Mr. Horsley, that's your specialty, right? I've seen your work when we were talking about the fields at Sherborn, and that's one of the sort of arguments that you had made on behalf of some folks that were, arguing against aspects of that project. So, but I think it could, right? It's like a public and private water supply, like there are interests of the act that can be impacted by hydrological changes, and so it is something we can address. But yeah, I agree with Michael that in this case, yes, the drilling of the well implies that it will be used, but we did specify that it would only service a single family home.
Can
If I
someone
may.
check the wording to make sure that's correct?
Looking at it, yes, that's what it says. I'm staring at the order of conditions right now.
Because I noticed in the original, can you read it, Michael? Would you mind reading the wording?
The reading says, the drilling of 3 drinking water wells designed to serve 3 single-family dwellings.
Thank you.
I move that we approve the change in location of the 2 wells and the addition of a well line, as indicated, is a minor modification, and that the order of conditions will reflect that the conditions for doing the well line also meet the conditions for drilling the well, where it talks about that drilling the well. And I'll just say as an addendum is that it basically talks about doing it under dry conditions and reseeding and whatever else, and that those conditions it's already one of the conditions for doing the well drilling, that would apply to the well line.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
We
Mr.
want
Horsley.
to-
Sorry,
we
go ahead,
want
Jean.
to, make it a condition now that, as of this date, no further work can proceed until the wetland flags are back up.
Are you offering that as a friendly amendment,
Yeah,
Michael?
Sure. I'm not sure that it's.
Excellent.
Well,
Thank you.
okay, whether it's
All
relevant.
right,
Okay.
Mr. Horsley, I see your hand up, but I don't know if it's left over from before or if you have something you would like to add in the discussion.
I would, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to point out that the notice of intent not only says strictly specifies the drilling of the well. It also talks about a drinking water well. I'm aware that many wells are also used for irrigation. And I'm also aware that many properties, that becomes the primary use during the summer. It can double, triple, quadruple the demand during the summer, which is where the impacts on the wetlands occur. So again, if the approval here, I just want to clarify whether the approval is to pump as much water as they want, or whether or not the approval is to what the notice of intent asks for, and that is strictly the drilling of the well. I would submit, and again, I have comments later. I'm trying to decide when they're most appropriate. I have some slides, but I do believe that if this well is pumped significantly for a lot of irrigation use, that is what I call a consumptive use. Drinking water goes back into the septic system. It recharges the groundwater system, not a big deal. If there's a large lawn, if there's a larger lawn, et cetera, that's a whole different animal. And this is a small wetland, so I won't go any further. But again, my interpretation is I'm reading the notice of intent for what it says. It asks for strictly the drilling of the well, and it talks about drinking water purposes. That's my understanding.
But Scott, you know that the notice of intent is the application, and the guiding finalized document is the order of conditions, which says that the purposes of the wells is to serve single-family dwellings.
It says drinking water wells.
Drinking water. Does
Okay.
not-
It's just a whole new topic that I think we should take up.
Yeah, I really, we're talking about the minor changes proposed. So-
We have a motion that's been moved in.
Exactly. So any other discussion on the motion? Okay. All those in favor, Jean?
Aye.
Neil, I, Michael,
Aye.
Carol,
I abstain.
Courtney?
Aye.
All right, the motion carries. Thank you. We're running a little bit behind, but it's okay because we're just going to continue this. So I'm reopening the hearing to 8486 Coolidge Street. And we are going to continue it until, when are we continuing to? The 17th?
The 17th at 9:30.
9:30. Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor, Jean?
Aye.
Neil, I, Michael,
Aye.
Carol,
Aye.
Courtney?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries. All right. We've got one more minute. So let's wait just in case anybody else wants to jump in at the last second.
I'll be right back.
Me too.
Oh, okay.
You don't have any hold music.
We could have a hold video if only we did. Birds.
Cute.
This is Cooper, one of our pandemic puppies. Cooper, say hi to the camera.
Brian, you know, anytime you come to a meeting, I'm just looking for the dogs.
I know.
They're
This is Cooper.
beautiful.
So Cooper, so we have two, and they're brother and sister, Courtney. And this one is FOMO, fear of missing out. And the other one is you only live once. That's Polly. She's over there asleep on the bed. Cooper, can you say hi? Atta boy. Yeah, say hi. Who is that? You see the people over there?
Oh my God.
So
God,
cute.
I want to hug you.
Yeah, I'll do it for you.
Okay.
All right, go lie down again, buddy.
Wow, he listens to you. Wild.
No, he doesn't. He is so poorly behaved. I think even Bob can attest to that, having been at the lot line a few times.
Okay.
Anyone who comes up and down that driveway, even as tenants, we have a tough time. They're really good with the collars and the electric fence that we put in, but because we got them during the pandemic, they haven't been socialized at all. So we are literally the worst dog owners in the world because they're so poorly behaved. But we love them anyways.
Of course. That's part of owning a dog, right?
I think someone said that there is no greater love, there's no greater feeling in this world than to know the love of a dog.
There you go. Okay, so it is a little after 8:05, so we might as well get started. I think that, but I want to sort of set a little bit of my expectation in terms of the discussion, because I think it has a lot of potential to go to places that it shouldn't. And so I just wanted to make a couple of points and then lay out how I'd like to proceed with this discussion. So first is that I want to, much as people might want to relitigate the NOIs that were approved and the orders of conditions that were issued, they were. So I feel like, at least from the tenor of some of the comments that came in earlier that probably belonged in this discussion versus the other one, that stuff should have been there during the initial NOI process. And if it wasn't, it wasn't, and that's not anything that anybody can do anything about. It's not to say that some of these things aren't valid. It's not to say that they aren't, applicable. It just means that, procedurally speaking, we have approved projects with issued orders. And so we can't go back and relitigate things. If there are sort of misrepresentations, new information, something like that. But even then, and this will be where I'll sort of betray my weakness on exactly procedurally what ought to happen. But I feel like all of that stuff needs to be appealed to DEP. So with that said, I think what I want to do is I want to make sure that the things that we do end up talking about are things that are relevant to the work of the commission, things that are in jurisdiction, that we're not sort of rehashing something that we've already discussed and approved. And then the other thing I really like to do, because I know that there have been a lot of materials that have come in, I don't want this to be a wide-ranging discussion. I want it to be very targeted to the things that are relevant to us. And so what I would like to do is go through, so there's an email that came in and is gone, and everybody has seen it who's on this, where there's sort of 4 issues that are raised. I wanted to actually use that as the kind of basis of our discussion. And if there's anything else, again, that's not in this email, I'm fine to hear it. But again, it's got to be relevant to the work of the commission, things that are in jurisdiction. So with that said, I would like to kind of start out by going through that email where the 4 issues are raised, and then we can kind of, I can sort of give you my perspective on it, because I think there are some in here that just have nothing to do with the commission. And so I want to, maybe clear them off so that we can concentrate on the things that do. And I know that, one other comment I wanted to make is just, I'm aware that some of what the Moores have brought to my attention and to Anna's attention and to Jean's attention is stuff that they just want everybody to be aware of that's on the commission if they haven't heard about it already. So it's fine to sort of articulate these things, but again, it has to be sort of centered on jurisdictional work, because that's what we're responsible for. Okay, so the first thing is just related to the easement. And I think the last question that, oh, sorry, Bob, you wanted to comment before I started?
Yeah, I just wanted to have a really quick conversation before we start, because Mr. Horsley spoke a little bit earlier, and I want to clear something up. I don't think this is an issue, but if it is, it's an important issue, but I think it's unlikely. So I'd just like to, first of all, when Mr. Horsley attended the planning board meeting the other night, he did not represent himself as someone representing the Moores or anyone else. He participated in the meeting, but never said he was representing the Moores. And I honestly, the meeting ended. I didn't know he was representing the Moores, and I'm concerned about that. So I'm assuming that we're all aware, and he'll say that he's representing the Moores tonight. And so I'd like for him to do that. I'd also like for him to let us know who else he represents. I think if Mr. Moore is being paid by people, and presumably he is, he's a professional scientist.
Me, Mr. Horsley.
I'm sorry, excuse me, Mr. Horsley, excuse me, yes. So if he could just tell us who his clients are, who's paying him, I'd be very appreciative. I think that's a matter of transparency that would be appropriate going forward. The next thing is there are some potential conflict of interest and ethical issues. Again, I don't think they're a problem, but I want to ask Mr. Horsley, Is he a shareholder in Horsley? What's the name of the firm? Witten? Is it? Do I have that right, Scott?
Mr. Horsley, are you there? Sorry.
Mr. Chair, are you going to take questions directly from people to me, or do they go through the chair? I'm sorry.
My tendency has been to, to recognize person and allow them to ask the question directly. So, Michael, what?
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to respect the process that I'm normally used to. So the question is, am I a shareholder in Horsley
But
Witten?
before you answer, Scott, I guess the question is whether this kind of material, if it's going through you, the chair, whether the reason for asking the question should just be, I think it's fair if Bob wants to ask the questions, that he explain the rationale for even asking the question.
Actually,
before he has to answer.
Hold on, before we even go down this road, Mr. Horsley sent me an email yesterday stating that he represented the Moors. And I sort of I didn't say that because I just thought it was understood, but if it's not, that's fine. In terms of conflicts of interest, I'm not going to adjudicate that today. We're not going to take it up. Like I cannot.
Neil, can I just say that I am a client of his firms, and I want to know if he's an owner of a firm which
Mr. Murchison, I think
hang on,
you're
may I finish,
incorrect.
Mr.
Well, hold on.
This is incorrect.
May I finish, please?
I'm sure it's incorrect.
His firm worked for me on Abbey Road, and they also had many conversations and visited 55 and 65 Farm Road with me at the beginning of this project. I shared private documents with them, with this firm, and I'm simply asking, is there a conflict of interest here? I'm asking for Mr. Horsley to clear it up. And if he can clear it up, I'm happy to move forward.
Hold on. Listen, if this is going to get contentious, I do want the questions to come through the chair. Carol, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
I think this is, since the question is coming through the chair, this is not, in my opinion, an appropriate question for the commission to be asking. We're not here to consider conflicts of interest. If Mr. Murchison has an issue like that, he can take it up separately, but it doesn't concern us in this case, in my opinion.
I agree that I don't want to adjudicate that. That's not our role.
I think this discussion needs to end and we can move on to another item.
I agree.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Carol and Courtney. Okay, so back to what we were talking about. So the first thing was so I'm going to go through this list that's in the email. So the first is related to the easement, and the question was raised about whether the commission has requested a revised plan of record that shows the easement. And I understand. So I understand why it's possibly relevant, but this is something that a question that I answered about a month ago, where the NOI that was filed before there was an agreement with the person who was granted the easement. So the easement was noted in the NOI, but it was not updated because that came in after the fact. Also, there's been no actual proposed activity to do any, let me just back up a step. The easement is something that would, if it's where it's drawn, end up going through jurisdictional areas, but nobody's come before us for a permit. Nothing has been filed. If there was proposed activity in that easement that crossed into jurisdictional areas, they would have to come before us for a permit. But because the easement was granted after the NOI application, it's not, there's nothing that compels us to go back and ask that it be updated in terms of a revised plan. So in that sense, I don't think it's relevant. So that's number one with the easement. Does anybody have any questions about that? Yes, Mr. Moore.
Oh, hi, Neil. It's Mary Moore.
Hi, Mary.
So I understand what you're saying, and I just want to clarify that the easement was called out in the option to purchase that was filed with the registry in January. And then when the actual transaction happened in, I believe, late September or October, it became, in effect. So I just want to make sure that was clear.
Okay. And we do have a sort of a representation of the easement And while it is true that it goes through jurisdictional area, it's nothing that anybody's actually tried to conduct any activity in those defined areas. So I think that from that perspective, there's not anything we would really do about it anyway. And unless somebody were to propose the activity, and then they'd have to come before us and have it permitted.
Okay, and can you please just confirm that the plans that you have on record reflect that easement?
New one?
Yeah, Anna, I don't know what you have on record with the lot lines.
You mean with the A&Rs?
No, the whatever that's been filed
The-
I think it
recently.
would
the
be
new
would
ones.
be the plot plans that with the
Yeah.
current plot plans is what you're asking, Mary, is that they be on the plans?
Yeah,
that
I feel like there's been a lot of versions out there, and I just want to make sure everybody's looking at the same thing.
I'm afraid I'm not able to give an
well-
answer either way on that, because I'm not sure which plan you're asking about.
I think it's outside of the frame. I think the plan doesn't extend to that part of 65, and that's why we're not sure if it's depicted on the applications that were just submitted.
Right, and I would say that I think, our temporary agent, Joyce had sort of said, well, we could ask for a revised plan, but it wasn't something that we had to, and it wasn't necessarily something that the applicant would be required to provide. So we have sort of a drawing which looks fairly accurate. Jean, remind me, where did it come from? Was that from Joyce?
No, I believe Mary Moore provided that.
Oh, okay, that's
Yeah,
right. Yes, you're right. Now I remember.
Maybe we could request that the file that you have just has the record of the deed that shows the easement and the language around the easement. I think that would be useful to have on record.
And I would also say that I think if you've submitted that stuff, then it'll become part of the file, and I think that's fine.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So the second has to do with, I think this the wetland delineation, 3 additional lots. Came across several orthoimageries that show the extent of surface water.
Yep.
Okay. So, and so this is what I wanted to say about this. Both our agent and the applicant's consultant went out and spent a lot of time haggling over where the wetland flags were. And there's not, I mean, from our perspective, there's nothing more that we would ever do about that, because we have our representative out there, Joyce, this is before predates Anna, but who's very experienced and making the consultant move some flags here and there. But we've confirmed the wetland line, and I understand that there's some other imagery there that might show something different, but that the standard testing that they do to determine where the wetlands are, hydric soils, vegetation, so on, that was what was used both by our representative, our agent, and also by the applicant's consultant. And I just don't think that I just don't see how this other stuff is really relevant, and how we can go back and just revisit something when we've had a representative look at it and confirm it in terms of a hearing and everything else. So the Moores have their hands raised, so go ahead.
I don't know if Michael wants to speak first or not, but I've spent quite a lot of time reviewing the DEP guidance on flagging of wetlands and that process. And it's my understanding that they are encouraging people to use all resources at their disposal for the demarcation of wetlands. Now, if that wasn't done in this case, that would explain why we have, it was so easy to obtain orthoimagery showing flooding. Our concerns are that this flooding, and I will try to keep this brief, that everyone who lives on the street has seen it flood right up to where the existing cart path is several times. Now, we've lived here 16 some odd years, and we've seen it well beyond that fence line, way up by the tree, over to the cart path. The people who live across the street attested to that in one of your previous meetings. And it seems as though we can't get any movement on this. And this is one of the reasons that we filed our appeal with Mass DEP, which we'll talk about obviously when you get to that bullet point. But our concern is that if there's no opportunity for us to claw back what's been issued, but there seems to be such obvious evidence that areas subject to flooding far exceed those wetland flags. And for this reason, we're wondering if it's within your powers to extend your jurisdiction after you issue an order of conditions. That's in the enforcement document. And it talks about how you can go and exert such controls after you issue an order of conditions. And I'm just imploring you to consider doing that in this case, because with all these moving targets, it's just going to continue to chip away at this area until it's fully developed and none of these resources have been properly protected. And so I think those are our comments. And I don't know if Scott has anything now, but I think he was going to chime in later on some other stuff as well. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me recognize Michael, and then we'll, if Scott has something he wants to add on that particular point. Go ahead, Michael.
I guess I'll just say for the sake of tonight that the points you just made, Brian, about whether there are ways to, such an enforcement mechanism to revisit that, in essence, the wetland delineation, we take it under advisement for the sake of tonight. And right, I'm not sure what means we have or whether we should, whether wetland delineation work could be done differently is something we'll just think about. And I don't think we could say anything more about it tonight other than that's what we did and that's what we put into the order of conditions, and that's the best for now. And I'm not sure that there's much more to say about it tonight other than the point has been made. And for thinking.
Okay, Carol.
Yeah, I'm just quickly looking at the Massachusetts guidance on bordering lands subject to flooding. Look, I was there when we were on the field visit. I've taken a wetland delineation class through Native Plant Trust. So I understand that Joyce was doing what's considered, and Deshang, we're both doing what's considered a standard wetland delineation. I think that, we should look carefully at this idea of land subject to flooding, because it is regulated. And if we miss that because we weren't aware of it, I think we should at least do our due diligence here on our side to examine that. And to the point that Mr. Moore made about that once an OSC has been issued, it can be amended given new evidence. I'm not making a motion. I'm just recommending to the commission that we look into this idea of land subject to flooding. Or maybe Jean, you may be aware of some other instances having with your experience as an agent.
Whether we can go back and
No, I'm just asking about the land subject to flooding.
Is this something we want to talk about tonight versus another time, given all that you have to do?
I think it's relevant. So let's let people speak. Go ahead, Jean.
Land subject to flooding has a specific definition. It's an amount of water held for a certain period of time to a certain depth. So we can surely look into that. But before any of that, I would say anybody who's done any reading about delineation knows that the soil testing is it's the most exacting method of determining a wetland line, because for the soil to show hydric characteristics, again, it has to be saturated for a specified number of months of the year in order for it to support hydric organisms. And the colors of the hydric soil are in a very complex chart. Anybody who's trained knows how to use the chart. And yes, Carol, we watched Joyce and Deshang battle it out using the charts. So
I'm not arguing about that.
Yeah, my point is that it's pretty commonly accepted that determining the hydric soils and the extent of them is really the exacting thing to look at. I know that DEP suggests that you look at other factors such as aerial photos of water lines, but in my experience when I was the agent, those are the things you look at when when you, for example, it's winter and you can't do a soil sample. You look at the photographs and you look at what vegetation is still present. But really the soil sampling is of the highest importance.
So can I ask this question? Because I was under the impression that land subject to flooding, 100-year floodplain is, as you said, Jean, a specifically defined thing. Aren't these areas mapped like in Mass GIS already?
That was my next question.
And if so, is this area shown as land subject to flooding? Mr. Moore, yes, go ahead.
There's obviously several different resources available to people who look for wetlands on maps, beginning with USGS. As a matter of fact, the town of Sherborn had their own series of wetland maps from the 70s and 80s. But the one that I would like to have Mr. Horsley speak about right now and comment on as our representative, as someone we've hired to help us in this matter, is that the US EPA has demarcated part of one of these lots as being, you know, essentially a stream in their stream stats program, showing it as a hydrologic connection between the pond and the wetlands that are like right over here along the edge of our land between us and the development, Mr. Murchison's. It's right on the edge of his lot. And if Scott would like to take this up, I think he has a slide that shows exactly where that, I think, Scott, can you take this? Because I'm kind of fumbling it. Is that okay, Neil? Can you do that?
Yes, I think within reason.
It's short.
Right. And look, I'm going to tell you, I think just to Michael's point, we're not going to sit here and start to pull this thing apart right now. But if these are things that are relevant, either for you to go before DEP about, or so sort of indicative of a mistake that was made that we might relook at an order, that's fine. But I'm just sort of, to me, I'm looking at this as these are jurisdictional things you're pointing out, that you're sort of you're pointing out or raising concerns about, and I'm willing to hear it because of that. But I also just want I just want to set the expectation that we're here to listen, because anybody who has concerns, it doesn't matter from what quarter they come from, we'll listen. But so go ahead, but we've got a lot of ground to cover before 9 o'clock. So let's
just that one slide, Scott, showing the stream stats shot.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I do have a few slides, and the first couple I think are directly to Mr. Murchison's request, which I think is very reasonable, to introduce myself. And so he knows who I am, and I think he stated some facts tonight, or some statements which are not true, and I'd like to clarify that and show you a couple of slides. I have a slide presentation I prepared, and it'll take no more than 5 minutes, if that's, and it will cover what Mr. Moore is asking me to do. If, with your permission, I can share my screen.
Yeah, please go ahead. I honestly, I don't want you to address the conflict of interest. If that's something that Mr. Murchison wants to pursue, I'd like him to do it through avenues other than the commission.
Okay, I will stay away from that one then.
Thank you.
Excuse me 1 second here. Let me get the right slideshow. It's not the right one either. Sorry, I've got multiple slideshows here. Let me close out a couple of them. My apologies, Mr. Chairman.
It's okay.
Here it is right here. I'm sorry. Okay. So first of all, I will introduce myself. My name is Scott Horsley. I'm a water resources consultant working for Brian Moore. He is my client. I won't go through this in detail. Some of you know me, but I have more than 30 years experience. I've done a lot of work for a variety of organizations, mostly for EPA, and consistently for more than 30 years. I've been working for EPA as I am today. I've also served in a number of national and state advisory boards, including many from Mass DEP, and I won't go through that either. I won't go through this in detail. Some of you know me, but I have more than 30 years experience. I've done a lot of work for a variety of organizations, mostly for EPA, and consistently for more than 30 years. I've been working for EPA as I am today. I've also served in a number of national and state advisory boards, including many from Mass DEP, and I won't go through that either. Currently on the adjunct faculty at both Harvard and Tufts, and I can provide details on that. And I've also been qualified as an expert witness in both state and federal courts many, many times in the field of hydrology, including work for the U.S. Department of Justice and the Environmental Protection Agency. Happy to go through that in more detail, but in the interest of time, I won't. Briefly, for tonight's, in preparation for tonight, I reviewed the following documents and resources. There's a lot more that I need to look at. So this would be, I would provide these as preliminary comments. You've asked me not to dwell on this, so I won't, but since I already have it in the slideshow, this is a map from U.S. Geological Survey stream stats, which shows hydrologic connections. This dot here represents Mr. Moore's property. So all of you probably know the land better than I. This is the pond that's on the site plan. So what this does suggest is a hydrologic connection along Farm Road. We also see this in some of the delineations from the National Wetlands Inventory and the Massachusetts Geographic Information System plotting. There seems to be a lineament or stream segment that runs between that pond, both west and east, that connects it. I have not been on site, so I'll just simply show that. And again, I apologize because you just said that you don't want to dwell on that, so I won't dwell, but it is, I think, relevant information out there that's of importance. I will also add here, because I don't have a slide on it, relative to the bordering land subject to flooding. And I was just looking for this, and I can certainly send it to you later. The regulations, the wetlands regulations, call for either a delineation published by the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association Agency on floodplains, or credible evidence of flooding beyond that. So if there are photos and evidence that can qualify for land subject to flooding, bordering land subject to flooding. So that's the definition. And again, I can provide the details on that later. So there may be floodplains that could be, somebody could petition for a resource area delineation beyond what's already been done. We don't need to appeal the prior one. Somebody can file for a new delineation in the area. And if there's evidence of land subject to flooding, then I'm sure the commission would be interested in that. And again, my comments tonight that I had prepared were focused on the wells that we started talking about earlier. This is one of the documents that I found that was provided by the applicant. There have been quite a few on both 55 and 65 as an overall project that have been submitted. So I understand these wells are being proposed to be moved, and I already commented on that earlier. This is obviously a copy of the notice of intent. And again, my reading is that the notice of intent, as the applicant pretty clearly says, is for the drilling of the wells. And that certainly impacts of pumping the wells is a different matter. I would say drilling in the wells has pretty minor impacts. And as I indicated earlier, pumping can be significant. And I do want to distinguish, and perhaps this will help, between what I call consumptive and non-consumptive use. If the wells are being used simply for drinking water, as the notice of intent asks for, that's a minor impact, because most of that water goes back into the groundwater system via a septic system, which is also proposed. That's a non-consumptive use. If in fact the water use is for irrigation, then that's a non-consumptive use. Excuse me, that is a consumptive use, and that has much more significant effect on drawdown of the groundwater in the area, and can certainly impact nearby streams, wetlands, etc. This is obviously a generic slide. This is not a slide for this site. This is something that I use at Harvard and Tufts to explain these concepts, just to make sure people understand the cause and effect. And that's pretty much all I had, Mr. Chairman, for tonight. I wanted to throw these concepts out because I think they're relevant. And again, as I've already stated, and I'll just go back to this slide, it's pretty clear to me what the notice of intent is asking for, and it's pretty clear to me what the town has offered in order conditions on. It's what I have highlighted here. And I think there's another issue that's an important one that at some point should be taken up. And again, I'll just reiterate, I think there, regarding the board, my client asked me to comment on the land subject to flooding. I wasn't here. I don't know what was discussed. I did look to see if there's any FEMA map floodplains. I do not see any, but I do want to be clear, and I'll be happy to provide the details later tonight, that the regulations certainly allow for delineations beyond what FEMA delineates, and that includes any credible evidence of photographs, videos, et cetera, of areas that are flooding that would be qualified as land subject to flooding. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will stop there.
Courtney, did you want to comment? You're muted.
I'm looking for the reaction button to put my hand down. Yeah, so the bordering land subject to flooding, that is supposed to be based on the FEMA maps, and the FEMA maps are supposed to be presumed to be correct. And it also is supposed to be the most recent information, and I believe preliminary information is legitimate as well. And it is meant to be like rebuttable, but I don't think it's as simple as just showing photographs of, you know, floodwaters. My understanding is there's some more details about, you know, looking at certain storms and what the water measurements are for the, like doing a flood study or something. I don't know how, I don't think we just saw a picture of the water, the land underwater at one point, and considering that BLSF.
And I think, just to respond to what you're saying, Courtney, I think that's right. And I don't know that necessarily the Moores or Mr. Horsley are saying that, but I would say I just looked, you know, because Scott, you're talking about it, and I'm looking and I see where the FEMA, it's Q3 flood zones, and it's off to the west, so there isn't anything there. And yes, of course, there's the notion that you could have present some sort of evidence that's, you know, sort of generally acceptable, as Courtney's kind of alluding to. And I would just say, I mean, the one thing that I will tell you is this, is that these are approved projects with orders of conditions. And there's a part of me that just wants to state this again, which is this is coming very late in a process that we are well down the road on. When the houses with their septics come back before us, that seems like an appropriate time. I don't see anything here that's such an egregious mistake that, and again, we're not going to decide this one way or the other tonight, regardless, to Michael's point, but I don't see anything so egregious here tonight that would necessitate us revisiting this. And it's just an observation I'm making. These are all valid points and valid concerns and jurisdictional ones. But again, we have approved orders. I mean, we have approved projects with orders, and nothing that's sort of overcoming some sort of presumptions we've made in there. But I see two people's hands up. Michael, you wanted to comment?
Sure. I guess I'll just start in reverse. Actually, I was going to say, yeah, I mean, we could still, there's some certainly food for thought here. And I'll just say that, right, it's certainly, to the extent that these are approved projects, there is Brian's comment about whether if we think this thing through more or find something else, that there is some other mechanism to reconsider some things here, or whether somebody else could file to reconsider or the appeal. And I guess going forward, what I was going to really ask about is to you, Scott, and you don't have to answer it tonight, but maybe it would be useful for our own thinking in a broader way of this whole issue of consumptive versus non-consumptive use from a single family well, and to what extent any other towns have managed to make that distinction in terms of when they're giving permission for wells, whether you've seen other, not to say it tonight, do you see other towns where they've managed to somehow deal with the fact of wells of some proximity to a wetland, that therefore then you have to factor in consumptive versus non-consumptive things there, which is a distinction that we don't make for single family wells, and whether there's other Wetland Protection Act examples or bylaws that, I guess it's maybe in bylaws and their regs that have come up with something practical to do that would be useful to learn about for our own thinking going forward.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Mr. Horsley, did you want to respond?
Sure, I'd be happy to respond to Michael's question. Yeah, I mean, I'll try to provide those, but there are examples. I can't name them right now, but I can certainly provide them later. I am a water commissioner in my town of Barnstable here down in Cape Cod. Not here, I'm not in Barnstable now, in Boston, but where we're limiting pumping in areas near wetlands for that
Sorry,
purpose.
just one thing. Sorry.
Yep, yes.
Michael, are you intending to share your screen?
Oh, no, I did that by accident.
Yeah, sorry. Continue, Mr. Horsley.
So again, I won't go on, but I'll get back to you with some. I think the question was, is there any evidence of other people dealing with this issue? And I'll try to provide that. I think in this case, I guess what I would suggest is where there are multiple wells, and I don't know what the landscaping plans are. That could certainly be something that could be conditioned, but that is the consumptive use part of this that I would be concerned about. This is a relatively small wetland area. We're at the top of a watershed. I think so. I think it's something worth thinking about. And Mr. Chairman, not to get off case, but I did find the part of the land subject to flooding, bordering land subject to flooding, which I could certainly show you quickly if you'd like me to do that. I have it on my screen right now.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so if I can just share again, and I'll try to get right to it here. Can you see that screen there?
Yeah.
So I put it in. This is the wetlands regs, and then the part that I was referring to here, I have the blue arrow, and there's obviously more to it. I don't want to take it out of context, but essentially what it says is where the floodplain information is not available, the boundary of bordering land subject to flooding shall be maximum lateral extent, which has been observed or recorded. I'm involved in a few other cases right now, and one is in the town of Milton, where the neighborhood is recording videos of flooding, and the commission is saying, well, we're seeing videos of flooding. I guess that's flooding. So, and I think that's, now it does say credible evidence here. So it has to be credible. You have to confirm it and make sure it's done in the right place at the right time. I certainly respect that, but I think I just wanted to show what I said earlier was the regulations do provide for delineation of floodplains beyond the FEMA maps. And that's essentially what I think this is saying. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So why don't we move on to the third item that's, I've got Carol, did you want to make a comment on what we've discussed so far?
Just a quick comment. Probably one of the reasons that I'm very interested in this issue about the flooding in this area is that for several years, my son went to school over in Needham. I drove down Farm Road every single morning and I saw that flooding in that property. That was not uncommon to have that happen in the spring. So I'm not surprised the abutters have seen that. And that also in this deck from mass.gov, it did say that pictures from local newspapers, videos on the web, or photographs or videos from local residents are examples of how you can observe or record flooding. So I think this merits more investigation, which I've already said.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm sorry. Somebody wanted to make another comment?
Yes, I have a video of an example of flooding. I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of this meeting, but I'm in a butter of 50 of the property. I'm very concerned of retaliation with the developer, but I do have an example of flooding in front of my property, and I do have a video of it.
Okay, so just
and I'm happy to submit that to the commission.
Sure, and what I would say is in terms of retaliation or anything like that, I think I don't really want those topics to come up because it's A, it's irrelevant, and B, it's unsubstantiated. Let's keep that kind of sort of personal comments out, I think. In terms of the video of flooding, by all means, it's something you can send to our agent. And if we do end up looking at the flooding issue again, if we do have before us, any sort of permitting that goes on with the homes that will eventually be built, it's something that would be relevant there as well. If DEP decides that they will hear an appeal of the orders that we've already issued, it would be relevant there. There's a lot of avenues for people with concerns about work in our jurisdiction to address. And we're happy to help with any of those kinds of avenues.
Karen, can you please
just identify yourself for the record? We need it for the minutes. Your full name and address. If you speak in a public meeting, you have to identify
Actually,
yourself.
no, Courtney, you don't. But if we can ask who, if because I actually read up on that because there was some other issues. You actually don't have the right to ask. Anybody can attend. But if she
Okay.
wants, if she wants to identify herself, she can.
I don't feel comfortable because of retaliation. So thank you.
I
Okay,
believe there's
again.
a difference between attending and speaking.
No,
Okay.
no, I like, believe me, because I wanted to be on the other side of it in a couple of situations, but I did read about it, and the courts have upheld that you are not allowed to force somebody to identify themselves in a public meeting. So, Mr. Murchison, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just want to say to Karen that I'm very, very sorry that you have these thoughts about me. I find
So,
them
just as I would ask her to refrain, I'll ask you to refrain. I understand the desire to respond, but I think let's, I've said it
twice, and it's very unpleasant and uncomfortable.
Mr. Murchison, I understand that. I've asked her to refrain, and I will ask you to refrain as well. Thank you. All right. So the third issue is recent well pumping activity at 55 Farm Road. I look forward to hearing if it is allowable under the OOC. So let me just sort of comment on that. There have been, I know that there's been some observations about well flushing and water going over the surface into a resource area. Anna, our agent, went out and observed it, and it was happening. She spoke with the applicant about it. He fixed the situation. And so I believe that that part of it is resolved. And again, it's fine if there's something observed and there's something that needs to be addressed. We sort of handle it and we talk and have a good sort of constructive conversation. And that's what happened with that. In terms of any kind of flushing duration, and maybe that goes to Mr. Horsley's points about sort of how much pumping is allowed. I think, you know, at some level, it becomes a kind of a Board of Health question because it's their sort of the wells themselves. Obviously, if it impacts wetlands, that matters to us. And then the last issue I think there was related to this was that there had been a trench dug for some of the drainage from what was being pumped, and it's actually in the documentation, and I believe it's sort of whatever has been constructed there for that purpose has met the conditions that were laid out for it. Does anybody have any comments or questions about that item? Mr. Moore or Ms. Moore?
Hi, thanks, Neil. Thank you for the clarification. I just really had reached out just to ensure that the activity that I had witnessed was allowable. So I appreciate your follow-up on that. There was a generator that was being used, and I just was curious if that's allowed to be stored in the resource area. I think I read on the order of conditions that it's not. So I'm just curious if it's intended to be there for a long time.
Well, there shouldn't be any equipment stored in the actual resource area if that's happening.
Perhaps then you could ask, is the generator that is there in the resource area? I can't tell from where I am exactly, but
Okay.
it would be good to confirm that it was not.
Mr. Murchison, do you know where the generator is located?
Approximately 55 feet from the resource area.
Okay.
Thank you for confirming.
Sure. And then the last thing, and I think this is in Ms. Moore's email, was just about the adjudicatory appeal. And you just sort of wanted just us to clarify or confirm or state sort of what had happened with the appeal. So let me just address that, because I think it's a point of contention and it's a valid one. So essentially what happened was, when I think Mr. Moore called our office and asked when the 10-day appeal period was up, we told him the wrong date. So it was a mistake on the office's part. We fully admit it. I actually spoke to Jill Provençal over at DP about it, you know, because there was this issue of whether or not the Moore's appeal had come in on time within the 10-day period, and it hadn't. I told her the same thing, which is that it was a mistake on our part. And she said, I understand that, but I still think we're going to reject it because whether or not it was a mistake, it's still outside the 10-day. And that was the decision that they obviously informed you of after the fact and informed us of after the fact. So just to state on the record in a public meeting, it was the dates that we communicated we were mistaken about it. And we've informed DEP and anybody else who's asked about it, but that is something that was a mistake on our part.
Yeah, well, we're on, so we're hot.
Yeah,
mic.
thank you, Neil. I appreciate that. And I had reached out because I had noticed in the minutes of, I think it was December 3rd, that one of the commissioners had asked about the status of the appeal, and the minutes recorded said that the appeal was denied because it was late. So I'd appreciate if the minutes could be amended to reflect, the full picture of what happened.
So what did the minutes say?
The minutes said that a commissioner, I don't have it in front of me, but it said that a commissioner inquired about whether there was an appeal submitted to the Mass DEP. And I think there was a response saying that the appeal was submitted late. So I just would love that to be corrected so that, it's accurate.
We're happy to go back and look and make sure, because I think there were a couple of different meetings where that was discussed, and maybe one
Okay.
was before we had heard, because I think what I had ended up doing was talking with DEP about it. And I think at the next meeting, I had come and said that we had gotten a verbal statement from them that they were going to deny the appeal because of a lack of timely filing, and that we were waiting for a written. And then actually the written, they said that it would come the next morning or that night, and it never did. It took probably a couple of weeks for us to hear in email form that denial was in fact what they decided to do.
And just for the record, for everybody, we did file, I'm not going to get, is it adjunctory appeal? Requesting adjudicatory appeal, requesting that they accept that we had a reason for having the appeal get in late. We received word 3 weeks ago that we needed to confirm the reason why it was late again. And the deadline for that is tomorrow. We did submit another letter. I don't know how the DEP will rule on that, but we electronic copied the commission as well as the applicant and all the people at DEP.
Ironically, the Mass DEP Office of Adjudicatory, or whatever they are, OAR at 1 Winter Street, gave us the wrong date for submitting the information back to them, and then they had to rescind their order and resubmit that to us.
So it's not just us that makes
I'm
sense.
not going to say anything, but
Okay.
in any case, we have filed that information. We shared it with Mr. Murchison. We're hopeful that we have the opportunity to present our information on that issue in front of them. But procedurally, the town is also the owner of the other side of the pond. They own, if I'm not mistaken, either under conservation's name or under the town's name, they own the town forest right there. So, procedurally, if we were interested on determining the full extent of areas subject to flooding, would it not be in the commission's best interest to maybe act of their own accord to demarcate that on their own, so that for the record it's correct, considering it also affects the town land that's right there?
There's a lot of things that it's in the commission's best interest to demarcate that we don't have the time to do. But I would say that I will put it to you this way. I think we've been pretty clear tonight that if there is credible evidence that there is land subject to flooding on this property, where this stuff is, where activity has been approved, that is something that we will consider. And I think that's all we can really sort of say at this point, because
well, then how do we, if we email it to you, if we bring it up in these meetings, how do we get it on the docket as something that there could be some positive action on? Because it seems like this can just keeps getting kicked down the road over and over and over again. And all the while, one more lot gets spun off, one more lot gets developed. And at the end of it all, we're going to have 12 septics right in front of our house.
No, I understand. But again, this is sort of well outside our purview, although obviously we have a role there. What I would say to you is this, is that if DEP agrees to hear your appeal, that is a place you can express that. Because if it's within their purview to issue a superseding order, which would mean they would sort of, add conditions or there's a variety of actions they can take. That would be one place to do it. The other place to do it is to bring it to our attention and say, look, we have credible evidence, maybe you have an expert weigh in or whatever it is, that this is, land that's subject to flooding. And then if that's the case, we would sort of figure out what we might want to or have to do about it next. I do think that if they agree to hear your appeal, that the best way to do it is to go through DEP.
At what point will the commission consider the cumulative effects? Is it the 2,000 gallons per day threshold that the applicant would have to trigger in order for you to consider asking him for an EHIR at the end of this project?
Well, the 2,000 gallon threshold is something that, where are you talking about cumulatively across multiple houses?
Yeah, because at this point, if you
'Cause
put the
if you're-
3 houses together, we're at 1,600 gallons or whatever per day.
Yeah,
And then you have the existing septic for 550 that's up there now. So you're over the threshold for this little area,
Right.
this little
Well,
2 acre area.
right. But I guess I would say that if these are single family dwellings, we tend not to. I mean, you've made an argument earlier, I think that.
But by the
that we
merger
should-
principle, they're all owned by the same person, by the same entity.
Well, but if you have a house developer that builds 10 houses, you don't take it as you know, as a single project, you know, and look, I'm not immune to, nor am I sort of adverse to considering cumulative impacts, but it becomes a fairly subjective thing for us. And traditionally, when you have single family homes, we just don't do it that way. Now, I mean, I think when there was sort of this open space subdivision, that thing that happened recently, you know, that was something where we brought that up to them because you had a real density there, houses very close to each other, potentially shared wells, all of that kind of stuff. That's sort of where that kind of thing comes into play. But again, if you made an argument or if you appealed to DEP and said this is a phased project, I don't know that that case has been made. I think if you were to make the case that this is a phased project, I think there'd be much more something that we could look at again. Also, Courtney has had her hand raised for a while. I want to recognize her.
It's a really minor thing. It's just about the minutes. If that was actually the conversation that happened in the previous meeting, that a commissioner asked a question and somebody else responded that way, but like we can't change it because that's what happened. But certainly tonight's minutes are going to reflect that that was stated in error.
Right.
I just want to make sure we don't go back and change minutes if
Okay.
that's what we said.
Good point, Courtney. Good point.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Mary just said thank you. Sorry, I muted her.
That's okay. Does anybody, we're sort of here at the 9 o'clock deadline, and is there anything else of substance that?
I do have one extra item that I just wanted to add here is that I'd like to point out that the process for this development is hinging potentially on open space, new bylaw for the town. And this is the one opportunity that we have to set precedent for how we treat developers. And by using the logic and virtue of the process that you talked about here tonight, any developer who's worth their money is going to come in and do one A&R, one A&R, one A&R, and they're just going to develop them all out. And I don't think that your bylaws are really ready for this open space development bylaw. And it's a travesty because we're the ones who are going to suffer when our well is fouled or our lawn turns into a septic field. And those are my comments for the evening. And I really hope you guys think long and hard about how maybe you could exert a little more authority over a project that obviously it should be subject to the EHIR provisions.
Well, but I don't know if it's obvious, but I take your comments in the spirit that you're making them. Mr. Murchison, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just to clarify something that I think Brian is unclear on. The EHIR is something that shows up in the Board of Health regulations, section 3, and it's certainly not relevant to the Conservation Commission work. So I'll just point that out.
Yeah, when you get over 2,000 gallons, yes, that is something that ends up in the.
Well, there's even some question about that, but that's for another day. I guess I'd just like to also correct or just remind Brian, because maybe he didn't hear me earlier in the evening. But I said early in the evening, Brian, that at this time, I am no longer considering an open space subdivision. I hope that's helpful to you, but I'm no longer exploring that. I'm not saying I won't do it, but I'm no longer exploring that option.
Okay.
Is there any commitment you'd like to make in a public forum
Guys,
about your?
no, not my meeting. Thank you. Sorry, you can take that up offline. Okay, anybody else have any comments? The witching hour is here. It's 9 o'clock. I'd like to move on. Mr. Moore?
I'm sorry, I wanted to just say thank you very much. I know as a former, chair and elected official in town, I understand how valuable your time is. I know none of you are really compensated for this, certainly not compensated enough. And thank you very much for your time tonight. And I'll just leave you with the thought that even though the EHR falls within the domain of the Board of Health, the Wetlands Protection Act is explicit that phased projects should not be allowed and should not be individually permitted. They should be permitted as a
Understood.
whole. And
Understood.
that's where we're at with this site.
Okay,
And
thank you.
Neil, if I could add, I just want to note that Anna has been very helpful, and I know she's relatively new to Sherborn, but we appreciate your work and thank you for your very prompt follow-up and courteous service. So we really appreciate having you on board.
We like her too. Mr. Murchison, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I would also like to thank the commission for their the time and effort they've put in on these issues. And Anna, she's put in a lot of time as well. And it's great that you guys have somebody permanent again in the seat. And then I'll just rebut a little bit what Brian just said, which is despite Brian's desire that I approach permitting in a different way, I don't have that option. I can only permit the way the law allows me to permit. And I'm just trying to follow what the law says. And I know Brian doesn't like the law.
All right. Mr. Murchison, you asked people not to say anything negative, and I'll ask the same of you. Carol, please, quickly.
One last thing, which is the phased project concept. I'm not particularly familiar with it. I'm wondering if the commission might want to, at least make it a discussion point in an upcoming meeting for us to educate ourselves about that idea.
I think there's a few things that have come out of this discussion that are worth exploring, like the notion of, what kind of evidence, can we accept as a floodplain, and something like a phased project is another, because it is sitting, it's in the regulations. I think it's a good idea. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. We always try to listen as much as we can and keep it within the bounds of what we have responsibility for. So, all right. Thank you for that. Okay. So moving on, we've got a 9 o'clock NOI for construction of a single family home at 93 Maple Street. So I got to read something here, don't I? All right, hold on a minute. Got to orient myself away from what we were doing and onto what we are, so I can open this up. Just hold on one second. 0 Maple Street. Do I have verbiage in here somewhere?
Yes, there's a sheet in there.
Fabulous. What is it called?
Let's see if I can help you with that much.
It usually starts with the date of the hearing. It'll say like whatever, 2/3/22.
I see 0 Maple Street. With,
yeah.
What's that?
It's the 2.3.22 document. The third
Thank
one
you.
down. Or something.
I got it. Thank you. All right. Notice is hereby given that the Conservation Commission of the Town of Sherborn will hold a virtual public hearing at Sherborn Town Hall, 19 Washington Street, Sherborn, Mass. at 9 p.m. on the 3rd of February, 2022. This hearing is held pursuant to Chapter 131, Section 40 of the General Laws as amended, the Wetland Protection Act, and the Sherborn Wetland Bylaw, Chapter 17, to consider a proposal by Creative Land and Water Engineering, LLC, on behalf of Paul and Andrea Kelly for the construction of a single-family home. Work will take place at 0 Maple Street, also known as 93 Maple Street, map 7, lot 163A in Sherborn. Work may be performed within the 100-foot buffer zone. The application is available for viewing at the Sherborn Conservation Office. All persons desiring to be heard will be given an opportunity to speak at this hearing. All right, welcome.
Good evening.
Dr. Wang, how are you?
Creative Land and Water Engineering. Present Mr. Kelly's, Mr. and Mrs. Kelly. So this is, I don't know if I need to share my screen to show the project, or which will be easier to view and discuss. Let me see if I can. Oh,
sure. Go ahead.
Get a close up. It's too many. Well, I cannot find my file. Sorry, I get a close up of my windows. I was listening from the previous one, so I had too many screens open.
While he's doing that, Anna, I guess we have the receipts for there. I was just curious, was there any, so there was nothing to do with natural heritage? As in the NOI, was that confirmed? If
Yeah, we're not in priority habitat or estimated habitat.
I also looked at Mass Mapper, so I can confirm that.
Okay.
The part of the application summary that I left blank was the abutter information, but yes, we have received the abutter notification.
Oh yeah, I saw the slip. Oh, okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the
we're
filing
sending
fees
that.
also have been appropriately filled out. I just skipped that part on the application and didn't have a chance to get back to it. I don't mean the application, I mean the application summary.
You mean
Okay,
you received
so
proof?
this one only have the forms. I have to
Proof that
turn
the
off.
others are notified. You got the green cards?
Okay,
Yes.
so here's a plan now. Okay. All right, so here you all can see it. You
Yep.
can all see it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is Maple Street. So this is oops. So this is the lot. Oh, I can zoom in, but just to give an overall presentation about the land. So this is the house lot line. And so 200 feet of frontage from Maple Street. So the driveway, so this is the 50-foot buffer zone and no disturb zone, and this is a 100-foot buffer zone. So as you can see, the driveway and most of the house and the septics are outside of the jurisdiction of 100-foot buffer zone. And a small portion of the house and the roof recharge dry well is located between the 50 and 100-foot buffer zone. We had a site visit last Thursday, and so at the request, we surveyed the tree, and then I will show you another plan. So let me grow up a little bit so we can see better. So overall, so from the side visit, you can see the buffer zone is very mild sloped, and there's a good amount of mature tree within the 50-foot buffer zone. And we surveyed within the area of disturbance, we have about 19 mature trees, mostly white pine and red maple and oak trees. So there's very little understory growth. So as far as the 50-foot as well as the 100-foot. So I will show you the planting plan. So after the site visit, during the site visit, so the commission members presented, asked us to get all the trees surveyed and provide a mitigation plan. So that's what I'm going to get. So if there's any questions about this, so the activities are relatively small. Well, I'm not saying small, it's within the buffer zone. It's relatively small, but it's, if you say small, it's still 9,900 square feet. So that's what we calculated. So there will be erosion control at the limit of it. And as far as construction, so probably the most relevant issue is the tree removal and the mitigation. So which I would like to discuss further. If there's any questions, it's a 5-bedroom house and the septic systems. So,
Shang, can I ask you a quick question before you move on?
Sure.
Can you describe the condition of the site as a whole, all the, from the wetlands to the 100? Is it basically woodlands? Is it undisturbed woodlands right now?
Yeah, it's I would say it's a pine, oak, maple forest land.
Okay.
With some activities, obviously you can see some old monitoring pipes or even some other things. You can see there's a foundation originally. We didn't check them back, but it's definitely field stone foundations here. So at the one point, this area probably farmland. I mean, so that's all I can tell because there's
So maybe 100 years ago, but
Right,
now
right,
it's all
right.
woodland now.
right.
And then the foundation is a fieldstone foundation then of an abandoned house or barn.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah, right here. So
thank you.
yeah.
Close to the road and close to the property line, is that where it is?
yeah, it's like in, so this is the stone wall.
Yep.
And this is the foundation hole.
Okay.
So yeah, there's even a, so it's a, we I don't, yeah, they ask if we're
Okay,
going to
but
save it.
otherwise
So,
it's woodland. I just want to understand the condition of the site now.
yeah, it's primary woodland. As I said, I think I have some photos in my mitigation plan. You probably see a little bit better. So Mike, you have a question before I move on?
I guess to the chair, to Neil, I guess whether we let him finish the presentation, move on to mitigation. I just don't want to get derailed into discussing the specifics of the mitigation before we come back to the bigger pictures of overall there's no, that whole idea of whether there's a basis for it avoiding impacts, reducing the impacts and the mitigation, and justifying that there's no impact by calling it only 10,000 square feet of alteration of a buffer zone, even if it's out of buffer, that we don't miss those bigger points even after we get into the mitigation issue.
Right. So I guess what I would say is I'd at least like to sort of hear the whole sort of proposal, even if we don't. And I think it's right to not drill into tiny details when there may be larger questions where those details may become moot. So if that's your point, like let's not get into the nitty gritty until we sort of conceptually are okay with maybe the idea of mitigation and the disturbance and so on. Okay.
All right, thank you. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So the proposed mitigate, so you can see all the trees, the sizes. So the numbers are listed in the table as far as the diameter of the tree TPH and the species. So this is just based on our conversation. If you're looking, so this is that you're looking into it. This is about the limit of disturbance. So you can see there's a pretty dense tree lines around the stone wall, which is so roughly about in the wetlands. And then there's the pine trees. And so there's secondary growth. I don't think it's like in real old growth, because you can see this trees is probably like a 20 to 30 years old in that range. So it's 10-inch. But some of the pine trees is probably over 50 years old from my assessment. So this is the tree. So we marked with the X on it. So you can, so there's mostly white pine trees, and there's a good amount of dead ash trees. So due to that disease. So that's what that basically look like in the buffer zone. In the no disturb zone and in the buffer zone, we get to, and from the plan as surveyed, if you can see, so those are the trees. So we have a red maple, white pine, red maple, white pine, red maple, white pine, red maple, red oak, red oak, sugar maple should be white pine. So mostly are white pine and sugar maple. So the total 19 trees, and given this areas, there's a good amount of tree. So as far as how to plant it, this is like the first version from the limited time. So we provided 3 species we believe will enhance the diversity of the undergrowth and provide a good wildlife food value. So in the front area, relatively, because there's tree, we proposed like rhododendrons, just like evergreen flowering, it would be present. So for people driving, and it's relatively on the major road, so it's not as critical, in my view, to provide the valid shelter for wildlife. But in the back, so we're providing winterberries and high bush blueberries. So so that the location, if you allow us to plant, you can see there's some open lagging growth area in the 50-foot. So ideally, we'll probably let to plant in some there, but I didn't proposing it because it's no alteration zone. So I kind of propose right along this edge. But if the commission, after you review it, I'd like to welcome any good suggestions, and so that we can so update or modify this mitigation plan.
Deshang, if I can pause you for a second. Anna, did you want to make a comment?
Deshang, I believe you said to me that the trees that are marked with the X's on them on the plan that have the, that say red maple or what, white pine, those are only the living trees, and that all of the dead trees are not shown on this mitigation plan. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's a few dead trees, yeah, so which we didn't pick it up.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for pointing that out. Yeah, we did say, well, we can leave some dead trees into the 50-foot as like amphibians. They would like to as a nest in their habitat. So that's something we can discuss. So if you go looking, so it's already some fallen trees in this buffer zone, with definitely some of the dead ones because they're kind of already weathered. So can be placed on more. You can see this is a pretty open, lacking growth area. So, which is about, you can see that's a view, it's about here.
So Deshang, the area where the trees, you're proposing to remove trees, those are not all because you need room for construction. You're taking them out because what is the plan for that area?
So if you're looking just, so one area is for the roof recharge. So we need to set back from our septic systems. And so for the house, and the rest of it is some kind of follow the edge of it. So from the edge of the house to there, so it's like in a 10 or 15 feet of passing space to get around. And there are some of those pine trees are pretty tall, and so you're talking about probably 120 to 150 feet tall. White pines. When you get a house there, it's from just with all this like severe storms I have seen. Many of that pine trees is to a degree, quite a few is compromised. It's probably can be snapped in somehow. Yeah.
Okay, but what about, excuse me, but what about the area south of the recharge? You're taking trees out there for what reason?
Yeah, this is so south of this area is just so we were just squared it out as like in the backyard, so extending this line. So after get to here, it's basically beyond. Actually, we were not even proposed much of work there, which is outside. We didn't do, so it's just end of this septic system. So that's where it's ended. So that's if and then we merge it with the 100-foot buffer zone and nothing getting into further south. There's no activity there.
I don't know whether you just clearly specified to your question, Gene, of essentially it's lawn. You could see the limit of lawn.
Right.
Basically creating about whatever,
backyard lawn, probably some landscape.
It's basically going from 10,000 square feet. It's going about 9,000 square feet of lawn and 1,000 square feet for the house. is what the
Yeah,
the
the
use of
total, the
buffers are.
total is 10,000. So it probably there's some of this. I have to guess. So I probably can give you an area. So the house part.
It's okay. We can, I mean, we can approximate that.
It's at about, I measured it.
Yeah.
It's about 1,000 square feet to 12
Right,
feet or so.
Right.
So hold on though. I do want to be clear on this. So because I'm looking at the tree removal. So which, other than that, for the house itself, which other trees are you're suggesting have to be removed with, what did you say, for the recharge area? What is this?
Yeah, the recharge is here. So if you're looking up to this line, so it's up to here. There's a 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a 4 trees, probably beyond the recharge gallery. Maybe we can consider. Let me see. So the maple tree we probably can save. I would think red oak, the white pine may not even need to cut beyond this limit. So we can save probably this 4 trees. They are not really that dense, you know. I would think it's probably okay to save them. That's a good question. So yeah, we can consider. So I was just presented the trees within the proposed limit of work as we submitted, but I think it's a good question. So since the pine trees is a good distance from the house,
Right.
red maple is pretty sturdy, red oak, sugar maple, yeah, I mean, this is worth probably consider to save. I feel it's we probably.
So can I ask a separate question? So where what looks like the septic system is there sort of below, yeah, where your cursor is.
Yes.
So I guess my question for you is, for the work that's going on, I'm just curious, outside of our jurisdiction, is that all now proposed lawn as well? Like going to be cut to, I mean, obviously the septic has to go in, so you're not going to have trees on top of that, but
right.
Like I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, at this point, we don't have, I think it's the homeowner probably will definitely going to have some good landscaping plan, which
Sure.
we haven't really get into a point. So if you ask me, I don't have a specific plan to tell you. So I would assume this area definitely they have to maintain with the 5-foot overdock around it, and then the septic tank all the way to the house. So within this area is probably definitely need to be a yard, depending on what the homeowner to a point they will really want to do. But I would think even they have to cut, probably most of them are tall pine trees. So it's probably, if anything can be brought, root up and to jeopardize the houses. I see lots of activities, people is trying to cut the really tall trees to, given the weather is getting kind of a crazy pattern.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
So that's what I can tell. I can check with the
I'm just,
homeowner.
it's a general question. That's all. That's fine. Carol, did you want to ask something or make a comment?
I have a question, Neil, and I can hold off till later if you prefer, about whether this qualifies as mitigation, but that's more of a discussion. Do you want me to wait on that?
Whether what qualifies as mitigation?
Well, whether what Deshang is proposing here in the 50 to 100 as a mitigation actually qualifies as mitigation.
Right. So I guess my question is, Deshang, how much more do you want to do you have that's new material to present to us? Or are we sort of free to kind of start discussing some of this stuff?
I'm done. So we're a single family house. Technically, there's no requirement on the stormwater, but we did provided the roof recharge. And if you're looking on the plan, we even provided like a little rain garden just for the driveway to pitching in. This area, it's a good quite a few hundred square feet for treating our driveway runoff. So there's no dirty runoff pitch into the wetland resource. So which is actually, again, this driveway is outside of jurisdiction, but I try to be as sensitive and responsible designer. We did provide a rain garden in this area. So it's like we did for the lot 2 farm road. So all this driveway is outside of 100-foot buffer, but we still treated the runoff using the rain garden before they discharge it. So
Okay, thank you. All right, Carol, go ahead.
The roof runoff go into
The recharge
to the dry
area.
well.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
so it's in a way the stormwater, even though it's not required, but I
Understood,
think we are
understood.
fully handled.
Yep, understood. Okay, thank you. Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, I shared this in email, and I don't think it got into the Dropbox, but that's okay. It's something that's easily found. So MACC had a slide deck about reviewing mitigation, and it's an easy way to look at the definition. So mitigation means rectifying an adverse impact by repairing, rehabilitating, or restoring the affected resource area, or by compensating for an adverse impact by enhancing or providing replacement resource areas. I don't think that what Deshang is suggesting actually falls under the concept of mitigation as it would be proposed by the MACC. You know, what is being described here is basically altering nearly 10,000 square feet of buffer, and then the mitigation is within the altered area and it's less than the 10,000 square feet. So it's basically saying, okay, usually we'll look at mitigation where something was already altered over time, or there's an alteration and they're restoring an area that has already been altered. So they're restoring it back to wetlands. This is altogether, it's a subtraction of resource area. So if Deshang had come to us, or Deshang, I would say to you, if you were offering to mitigate 10,000 square feet elsewhere than what you've altered, then I would view it as a mitigation. But the idea of altering 10,000 square feet and then offering to replant or bolster some fairly small percentage of it, to me, doesn't actually qualify as a mitigation.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Michael, did you want to comment also?
Yeah, I guess I'll come at it a slightly different angle than Carol, but I guess I'd like to step back to the bigger picture of, right, we have natural buffer zone there. There's 10,000 square feet being altered. And I guess it's in the outer buffer zone where I guess the performance standards are less clear cut. That I guess it's on the applicant. I mean, it's not in here as to basically as, I guess, that there isn't a description of what in the world, of what the NOI is a little deficient in terms of describing what's there and in terms of text, and then saying whether you want to defend that all that level of alteration with some basic logic for why this does not have an adverse impact on the wetlands. That the burden of proof is on you, but you have the right to rebut that. It's particularly a little bit different than for outer buffer zone than, let's say, inner buffer zone, where we have more details, or if it was in a wetland, which has a resource area itself. There's a lot of other rules about that, but there's no presentation of how this degree of alteration of the buffer zone is not going to have an adverse impact there, even with whether those whatever 20 trees or bushes really. Plus, I do have to correct something that I think I saw written on the plan. when I was on the site and talked about that there's a lack of understory or some understory issues. That was an observation about things that could possibly be enhanced, but it was by no means to the exclusion of other possibilities.
So
But I'd say the bigger picture is how do you, is defending that there, and that there's no detail, there's no evidence of, like in the wetland regs, of the whole issue of avoidance. Could the septic system be shifted a little bit so that the house could be shifted a little else out of the buffer zone? Could the lawn be reduced? Just because there's not an understory, lawn is far less of a good buffer zone than what's there now.
So let's do this. I don't mean to cut you off, Michael, and I'll let you finish, but what I want to do is, just because we only allotted a half hour for this tonight, I'd like us to maybe, if there are things like what you're laying out, Michael and Carol, what you've said that we want to sort of see more information on, maybe we can articulate those things now so that we can continue the hearing and move on with our agenda.
Well, I would say for my part, you know, I'd like to see how, I'd like a more explicit description of how this complies with the concept of mitigation. And also another slide here says the WPA says that the surface of the replacement area to be created shall be equal to that of the area that will be lost, with no net loss as the principle. And so I would like to see details of how there would be no net loss of, you know, this, you know, basically undisturbed buffer. And I would also mention that in our regulations, it explicitly says that the resource areas, that in order to protect these resource areas in Sherborn, any altering activity, any within 100 feet horizontally outward shall be reviewed. So it's true that we're, you know, the 50, have extra stringent, you know, protection, but the 100 is protected.
But there's a contentious, something that we have to resolve. I don't consider the buffer zone a resource area, so that I'd say the mitigation, others seem to feel differently, but I don't think that the mitigation guidelines that you sent necessarily apply to the outer buffer zone. Others might feel differently, but I don't think that's part, in terms of asking what we need going forward. I say it's more of a general issue of defending how that I don't think that, since it's not a resource area, changing that. So I guess I feel differently about outer buffer zone than resource area, which is the mitigation thing how I read what you sent out, Carol. And so the question then is showing how these alterations in the buffer zone with any changes or mitigations or reductions will not adversely affect the wetlands. Plus, I'd like to see, and part of that is showing that there's also maybe some attempt to avoidance in terms of that the house could be shaped differently and fit and not be in the buffer zone. And I know there's not a lot of room to move the septic more than maybe 10 or 20 feet, shifting it one way or another, but that might make a difference. And then even I have questions about the dry well is maybe useful there, but could the dry well be put on the other side of the septic system? And so there's a whole set of just avoidance and reduction kind of issues that I'd like to see as part of defending what this is, and then defending that, or show it in some mix with showing that it's not, that there's not going to create an adverse impact.
So let's do this in the interest of time. I think it's perfectly reasonable if Michael, Carol, or any other commission member wants to send Anna sort of a list of things that they're interested in getting more information about. She can pass that or collate that and pass it along to Dr. Wang. And then I suggest that we continue the hearing, because I think we just have to do that. So I move that we continue this hearing until, Elizabeth, can we put it on our 17th agenda?
At 10:15.
10:15 to February 17th at 10:15.
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion right now? All those in favor, Jean?
Sorry, I just wanted to add that I should have said this earlier, but Anna, can you be sure that you send your application summary to Deshang as well?
Yeah, appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
I
Yeah,
didn't, absolutely.
Okay.
And then it could be compiled with the other stuff, right?
right, yeah, if
Okay.
the permission can
I've submitted
compile and
some stuff.
yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay.
Rather than I take my notes, I did take my notes, but
I understand. I've got a
And,
motion. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor, Jean,
Aye.
Neil, I, Carol,
Aye.
Michael,
Aye.
Courtney?
I'm gonna abstain because I just signed back in.
Fabulous. All right. In that case, Deshang, we'll see you on the 17th. Thank you.
thank you.
All right, what do we have next? 68 Maple, is that where we are? Yep. Anna, you're gonna present on this one?
Before we present on this, I just want to state that I'm in a butter and I'm going to recuse myself from this situation.
Okay, thank you.
You realize you don't have to.
I'm gonna do it out of a good appearances, abundance.
Abundance of
caution.
caution.
Exactly.
Yes, okay, thank you. All right, Anna, go for it.
I am going to recap my site visit to 68 Maple Street. I have some things to show you. And the property owner, Harley Kaplan, is here, I believe. And so if I miss anything, he's here. So I went out to take a look at, in response to a concern about potential that there was tree cutting in our jurisdiction. And what I observed was that there was tree cutting in the there was evidence of tree cutting in the outer buffer zone. And I will show pictures of that. But the whether it's in our jurisdiction is a bit more of a complicated question. So the conclusion that I came to after consulting various authorities, and I can be more specific about that as needed, is that, and there are regulations that I have put in the Dropbox that I want to refer to, but that the tree cutting was very close to a access way that the property owner uses to get to land under cultivation, and that it was part of maintenance of this road, and that is allowable by as part of the farming in wetlands. And what I want to refer to is, and you have it in the Dropbox, this is a few screenshots from a DEP manual about farming in wetland resource areas. And the screenshots that I pulled up are about let me see, start with screen share. So this is part of the maintenance section in this manual that I also put the full manual in there, but I have highlighted that maintenance of an access road is an example of maintenance that is allowable. So that is the jumping to the end of things, to tell you that my recommendation is that we understand this as tree cutting that was done as part of maintenance of a road and that it's allowable. So I'll stop that for a minute and back up a little bit to say that this property has a 61A agricultural exemption with the town, but that as I have been researching this and consulting various people, that there are two really important things for us as or for you as the commission, me as the agent, to understand about agricultural exemptions. One is that its specific areas are exempt. Like there are certain activities in this particular case, there are certain acres on this property that are Christmas tree farm. And there are certain activities that are exempt and allowed, exempt from us and that are allowed in there. And there are different acres that are exempt under a different part. And so that it's I want to be clear that certain acres that have certain restrictions, and also that it's specific activities, that it has to be related to the exact farming that's happening. So putting aside the roadway stuff, which is a sort of side interpretation of things, if we were concerned that if we were going to say, okay, this land has agricultural exemption, and that's why we're, that there's cutting allowed in the buffer zone without coming for a separate, without coming to the commission, then we would need to be, I totally lost my train of thought. It's gone.
Were you going to say that we would need to see documentation?
That probably. So thank you, Jean. So another piece of this is that the documentation, part of the application requires the 61A application. Part of that application is a forestry, an improved management plan. And that isn't something that is on record for this property. So if there are going to be any other activities proposed on this property, and we would be trying to figure out where our jurisdiction overlapped with an exemption for a part that's proposed, that's productive woodland, because there's certain things that are under productive wood, certain parts that are under productive woodland, certain parts that are under cultivation. If we were going to figure that out, we would ask that there be a approved management plan for the part that is under the exemption under productive woodland. So, and if the commission wants to view this as not going the route of it's a path, it's a roadway, but really wants to dig into, is this productive woodland? and where does the productive woodland overlap with the buffer, our jurisdiction, then we would want an approved plan that would then be on file with DCR. I do, while I'm on that, I will point out that, well, I'll get back to that. I'm going to show some screenshots. I'm going to show some photos and Mass Mapper. So, which is, you may be more familiar with Oliver. Mass Mapper is just Oliver, but different version. Now it's called Mass Mapper. So this is 68 Maple Street, this long property. This is Maple Street at the bottom. And you see that there is a wetland that stretches in the middle of the property. And then there's a wetland on the conservation area, just to the west. And so the area that we were looking at was between these two wetlands, and can't click on it. So there's jurisdictional area in the absence of any agricultural exemption. There's jurisdictional area, coming from this wetland as well as this wetland. And then just to give you a sense of the property overall, can you see this photo? Like, it's hard to tell what I'm sharing at the moment.
Yep, we can see it.
5467, you're seeing my whole desktop here?
Yeah.
Okay. So this to the left is so this is looking from the north of the property to the south. And to the right of the photo is this this access road that the property owner uses to access the Christmas tree area that's that's at the north of the property. So it's sort of behind the camera, further to the north. And on the left of the side of the photo, you can see this is one of the wetlands. And like I said, we're looking south, and out of the frame to the right is, well, I'll get these are some of the trees. These are, you can see the stumps that were cut along. And that's something that I haven't mentioned, but that was asserted multiple times by the property owner who met us out there. Mr. Kaplan met us out there and showed us his property. Was that some of these trees that were taken down were damaged by storms, and so that was part of the maintenance, that they were already trees that were damaged. So just these stumps are barely visible here. That's one of the images, but I want to show you that some of the trees that were taken down, you see that they're just stacked right along. This is pretty close to the edge of the wetland. It starts more if you go this way to the left. So then this is standing in a very similar spot. You see that same row of trees, of stumps anyway. And this is looking up towards the conservation land to the right. And that's that photo. And then let's see, oh, that's the same one. Bear with me just a second, please. So this, you have, again, very similar location, but I believe this is the stump that we measured to. It was to a pretty rough estimate, but by Joyce of the edge of the wetland, eyeballing the edge of the wetland with her expert eyes. We measured about 75 feet from this stump here to the edge of the wetland. So it is in the outer buffer. So really, these are the trees, these stumps that you can see in a row along the access road here are the ones that we're talking about. And then one more picture, pulling it up. Just gonna grab it, bring it over. You already saw that one. So maybe I've shown everything I need to show. So I'm gonna stop. And the final thing that I want to add is that Mr. Kaplan has expressed that while he realizes that an approved management plan could be in order if he was going to put more land under cultivation, that he's planning to sell the land and not planning to expand, and asks the commission if his position would be that he would not want to do an approved management plan for the productive woodland area at this time, and that's where he is, and that's all I have.
But it is required, a management plan.
Is the Christmas tree, you're talking about the Christmas tree? Is that
No, this is
forestry?
So the Christmas tree part, there are several different kinds of acres identified in Mr. Kaplan's 61A application, which is a state application that goes through the town of Sherborn. And it was a public record that the commission, that I obtained. So there are some acres for the Christmas tree under cultivation as Christmas trees, but that's not what I'm talking about. There are 11 acres, including the area, possibly, although we would need documentation of this. So there are 11 acres of the property that are classified through this application and through Sherborn's approval of this application as productive woodland. And that's the thing that it says on the application that there needs to be a plan for. And at this point, I want to share something that I forgot to share, which was from, I'll go back to my desktop here.
Anna, while you're looking for that, can I ask you a quick question? So
I can't do both, so I can, yes.
Oh, I was just wondering if the 11 acres includes the part where the current tree cutting is, or is
We
that?
don't know. So that's the thing, that there isn't this approved plan for it. So it says there are 11 acres, but it's not clear where the 11 acres are. I would speculate that they are, but that's why we would want an approved plan. So I want to go to this excerpts from my email with Amanda Zaretti, who is from Petrini and Associates. And so that is what I want to share. This is also in the Dropbox. So work performed for normal maintenance and improvement of land and agricultural use, or improvement of land in agricultural use, or normal maintenance of land and agricultural use. Is like, these are, it may be exempt, but it would need in order to be exempt, according to this form, which is a state form, it needs to have an approved plan, and that plan is not part of, it's not something that we have a copy of or that's on file with DCR, and Mr. Kaplan has explained that he's never been asked for that and has not, that it hasn't been part of what has been required of him from the town. Does that, I mean, it's fuzzy and I'm
I think it's combining two different things. So you have 61A protection, and then you have this notion of like a, like land that's, with DCR is has a cutting plan or a management plan. And so I think in terms of getting these exemptions, I think it has to be, I'm getting the terminology wrong, but doesn't it have to be a part of an approved plan? Or that in order for it to be designated as, land under management or whatever it's called, it has to have a plan. Like otherwise it's not, that you can't get the exemption because the exemption is for stuff that meets the requirements. One of the requirements is a cutting plan. Is that right?
And yet that's what the application says, that it has to have an approved management plan, should be attached.
At any point, can I talk at this meeting if I can add a couple of statements?
Sure.
Right. So I think in a little bit of history is going to be important. And thanks, Anna, for coming out to the property, visiting it. First of all, the property was under 61, regular 61B, in which, and that was up for several years. And then I put it to 61A because of growing of the Christmas trees and all the ancillary use of the land that I have around me, such as removing wood or mapling, or we have quite a few trees in the back, berry trees in the back that I use. So everything was done transparently. Under no circumstance was anything filed or done without any sense of transparency. And that was done. So it was immediately put from a 61 to 61B, 61B to 61A with full transparency. So the first time I remember hearing about this approved management plan is when this was brought up because a neighbor complained about me maintaining my trails to get to my trees. The trails where I have opened up are heavily used by the residents of this town. About 20 to 40 people go through my trails on a daily basis. And I maintain those trails for those residents for the last almost 30 years I've been here. So two things, I spent some time talking with the Massachusetts Farm Bureau to go over things, because the question was asked whether or not you need to have an approved management plan. And I told Anna, I said, listen, Anna, if I was to put any more land on the conservation, I'd be glad to have an approved management plan. I'd be glad to get one for you if I was going to cultivate more land. But I have no intention of, opening up more land. As Anna mentioned, I was considering selling the property. My wife and I finally come to an agreement to sell the property. She wants to sell it, I don't. So one of the requirements of me selling the property is that I wasn't going to sell it to the developer. I wasn't going to sell it to the farmers, specific type of farmers. I'll explain that in a second. And I'm really looking for a right person to buy the property. I've had 7 offers on the property so far. 7 offers, 4 of them from developers. 1 was for a drug rehab, and 1 was for a pig farmer who came back with a total plan for the property, including containment sections. I mean, this gentleman knew my property, came with the whole plan. And I rejected all of them because I wanted to keep the property as a farm. It's an important property in Sherborn. And I appreciate, again, this is the first time I'm hearing about an approved management plan. No one ever mentioned that when I filed the application. No one said that I needed to have that done. I would have certainly had it done years ago. But right now, the process here, as I said to Anna, is, I'm looking to possibly sell the property. I personally don't want to sell the property. My wife does, but that's okay. But right now, if you go to Zillow, you can see that I put restrictions on the property to only be sold as a farm, to a young family, to somebody who are interested in raising horses, because my property is also used for a lot of horses going back and forth. So I'm really hoping to avoid an additional expense from the town. Again, the other acreage is used. I mean, when when trees fall, I harvest those trees. I thin out the wood for, I don't want my property to be a tinder cake.
I don't touch woods and wetlands because it's most of that time because the wood's not really that good to use anyway. But all the rest of my property, I do farm whatever wood that fall, whatever windfall I take. So I guess the question is, I'd be more than happy to put together a management plan. It costs $3,000 to $5,000 for this plan. Okay, and that's a lot of money. And as I said to Anna, I have no intentions of putting any more land into cultivation. I would prefer, I would love to keep the property as is for myself for the next 10, 15 years. But that being said, if I find the right person, I want to be able to have that right person. If they want to put together a management plan for them, that's fine. But I'm really trying to avoid that.
Right.
And
So, Mr. Kaplan,
okay.
if you don't mind me interrupting for just a second,
Please.
because I think those are, I mean, I understand the sort of the history and the possible sort of future use and selling it, that kind of thing. I think for our purposes, I think, and Anna, correct me if I'm wrong, really the issue is for the activity that's been observed, that activity is only allowed under the circumstances where all of the sort of requirements to be classified as, maintenance in under 61. I can never keep it straight. 61A or 61B. That part of that process is having a management plan, and it's not something that we can sort of say it's okay or it's not. We just are bound by those requirements, just like you would be. And so I mean, and maybe Jean or Anna or anybody else on the commission can kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's sort of what we're up against. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not. If to keep the exemptions of operating or maintaining at any level alive, there needs to be a management plan. And according to Anna, it states right on the application that was needed. I also want to say that, if it's down the road, this property is going to switch hands, it's even more, in my mind, it's even more critical that there's a plan in the file so that the future owners will, so those rights to exemptions, if they want to carry on agricultural work, those rights carry over for them.
So let me ask this question, because this is another thing I'm just not clear on. So then technically this land is not under 61A or 61B because it doesn't have a management plan, right?
It's
No,
getting,
it's under 61B. I've been approved by the town, I've been approved by the state for the property. So this is already, and for more than 10 years, not 5 years. It's more than 5 years. Is usually, what I understand, the Massachusetts Farm Bureau says under 5 years, it's one issue. But this property's been, done for over 10 years.
right, and that's a tax classification. And that's separate from actually conducting agricultural work in wetlands jurisdiction, which is why we need the plan.
Well, I'm not doing any work in wetlands jurisdiction because the road, the access road, which was already there for at least way before my time, is not, I'm allowed to carry out normal maintenance in that area.
No, but if it's, I mean, the definition of a jurisdictional area is within 100 feet of a wetland, so it has nothing to do with whether a road is there or how long it's been there. That's just not how it gets determined. I understand you're not sort of going into an undisturbed wetland or buffer zone, but the activity itself is in jurisdiction, and so that's where the need for the exemption. And I think, Anna, if I'm not mistaken, you're saying, well, look, like, we understand what the history is and we're okay with it. But going forward, we're going to have a plan if there's going to be more cutting. And Michael, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
I have a comment. First, I'll start with a question is some land in 61A and some land in 61B?
I believe it's all in 61B because I utilize all of the land. I also do other things in the land outside, such as mapling. There's also some wild berry trees there. I do remove some of the wood that falls.
Okay, what
And
my understanding is, I'll ask you, Anna, then, whether 61A, I think, pertains to agriculture, where 61B, in a simplified way, is the forestry. Under
so
No,
the
60B is recreational.
the application that I have been looking at, and I apologize for not putting it in the Dropbox, and I don't have it ready to pull up, but I could, if I took, a couple moments off camera to grab it, but is a 61A application that was approved for the current fiscal year for Mr. Kaplan's property. And, I now really want to grab it because it sounds like it's, it's hearsay of two different people saying it's 61A and 61. So I'm gonna mute myself for a second, turn off my camera, and grab this thing so I can be reading it and making sure that I know what I'm talking about.
So, but you, Neil, while you're doing that, you think 61B is just related to, that's the recreational.
Right, my understanding is
61.
61A is agricultural and horticultural, 61B is recreational.
But what?
You know what? It's on the Sherborn. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's actually on the Sherborn website. It's kind of easy to find. It's a link to the mass.gov, and it includes forestry. But it says under forest management plan certified by the state forest, permitting the preservation of wildlife and natural resources. So it does include forestry, but you're right also, Neil, that primarily it's recreational purposes and open to the public or members of a nonprofit, or to be maintained in a substantially natural, wild, or open condition, a landscaped or pasture condition, or a managed forest condition under a forest management plan, etc.
Okay, so 61B is forestry, the other is agriculture. Okay.
That's what I was trying to say. So the forest stewardship plan, what I'm trying to get at is the forest stewardship plan is needed for the land in 61B, I think. And the agricultural use, that's a matter of whether you actually are farming it. That's where it's more cleanly, if you're doing an activity that somehow got grandfather, as to, I can't tell whether the areas that we're worrying about,
I put it
tree
in
cutting is a 61A or a B issue.
May I jump in here?
Yeah.
Sure.
So this is the application that I'm talking about. It's a state tax form. This was from the assessor's office. It's for, November 2020, effective January 2021. So the application that, as far as 61A, that box is checked. That's what when I say 61A, that's because I'm talking about that checked box there.
Okay.
And then this is the part another part that I'm talking about, that we've got this application from Mr. Kaplan has 2 acres in Christmas trees, and then 11.36 acres is productive woodland. Attached copy of state forester certificate and approved management plan if initial application, or new/revised plan. That is what I'm talking about.
So we have a gap here where something went wrong, where a plan was never initially filed, and this thing has been renewed every year without having the appropriate supporting plan. Is that we're just in a place where some mistake was made in the past, that a plan was not submitted? Is that where we are in this?
Well, I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that originally there was a plan at one point on this property, because I couldn't go through the process without something. So there was an initial plan.
Then we need to see that plan.
What's that? I have no idea whether you should have it on your file.
Well, no, it's not ours to manage, so we would not have it.
Right.
Okay,
We get to review.
I didn't approve it. You guys did.
And
So,
DCR
okay.
does not have the plan.
So, right, so just to set, Mr. Kaplan, just to separate, the Conservation Commission doesn't have anything to do with this stuff. So this would be, DCR would receive the plan and they would have it on file. They've told Dan and they don't.
We do have a role for that. We get to review them if we want, if we have the time. So we do have.
But we are not the stewards of that.
Right, okay, I was just trying to be clear. And the question is whether the assessor should have, whether it's part of the records issue, maintaining of records properly, whether the
So-
assessor is supposed to maintain it.
Can I answer that? It is, there, the links that I just put into the
Yeah.
chat are on the assessor's webpage. So I would assume that they go through the assessors. And then,
Here's. Sorry, go ahead, Carol.
well, I was going to say 61A does include agriculture, including forestry products for a profit.
Look, so look, here's what I'm going to say. I don't want to solve Mr. Kaplan's issues with documentation for him. I think we're at the point, and Anna, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is activity that if there was a plan would have been exempt. And there's sort of this issue in terms of documentation of whether there was a plan, whether there is a plan. There is no official plan right now because DCR is the owner of that assessment, and they have said there is no plan. So what I would say is this, is that whatever activity happened that was sort of seen as maintenance, and we want to say, okay, it's fine, but you got to go get the plan, or you got to go sort out where the plan went, or you got to go have a new plan made. That's not, I don't want to get involved. What I'm
No, I
saying
appreciate
is
that. I
I
understand.
just, what's that?
I appreciate that. No, I understand. I
So,
got it.
so my feeling is go fix the plan problem. And then otherwise, if somebody else says, hey, you're cutting trees in our jurisdiction, it's going to come before us and we're going to say, did you deal with the plan? And you're going to say no. And then we're going to have some issue where we get into enforcement, which we don't want to do. And,
Well,
and
Neil,
I-
I'm sorry. So, I have no plans to do any other further work on the property.
Okay.
Putting anything on the call. That's what I told Anna. I said, Anna, because Anna has been really helpful. She's been really helpful, actually. I learned a lot of things too. I told Anna, if I was to put some more land into cultivation, if I was to do some things, I'm done. Okay, I'm not doing any more land. I'm not doing any more stuff. This whole thing, I was the one that came forward on this because I saw it on the website that Harley had an issue. I had no idea there was any issue that I had with my property until I saw it on the website. So,
Right,
I'm
right.
not trying to be, I'm trying to be transparent. I mean, everybody's, I understand what you're saying. All I'm saying is that I don't have any intentions of doing any further work on the property.
Okay. All right. Carol and Michael, you both have your hand raised. You look ready to go.
Shall I
Carol?
first, Michael, or would you like to?
You
Carol, go
raised your
ahead.
hand first, so go.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear as a commission about what status the land is. And from what Anna's saying, and from what I'm seeing on the assessor's website, if it's under 61A, that's an agricultural situation. And therefore we would consider this tree cutting in the context of agriculture. I'm bringing that, well, so I see Michael, you're.
Yeah, I'll
I'm
comment
interested in your
after.
perspective.
Yeah.
So I guess that's it appears that the application is under 61A, and so that prevails, but if it doesn't apply to that particular acreage, this is obviously a little bit complicated issue, but I wanted to bring that up.
The reason I was shaking my head is because we're talking about activities. The case of it's agriculture and forestry on this application under 61A. If I got it straight, the agricultural work has a different set of rules than the forestry part. The agricultural stuff is separate, how you're doing it, all the rules, what's best practices and whatever else is separate from the part of the land, the 11 acres. He's got some acres under agriculture on that 61A. And that has a separate set of rules, and you have to follow separate best management practices for agriculture as per the report that's in that Anna put in there. For the land that's under protective woodlot or so, that's forestry work, which comes under a forest stewardship plan, which has its own separate set of best management practices. And that's the one that's missing a plan. I think the agriculture is a little bit different guidelines. I'm not sure you have to have a plan. You just have to, I'm not sure how you get it into it, but they've got it there. But then I'd like to come back to what it is to the tree cutting. So besides the fact that this plan issue has to get resolved for the forestry part, the woodland part, the 11-acre part, that's not really our issue, is whether the tree cutting that went on or whatever activity we're worried about, I don't even have a sense of, is it just those set of trees along a road? Has there been work done or was it an area related to the agriculture? I don't even have a sense of the scope. And I guess maybe you don't know ourselves because we don't know where the 11 acres are that's in forestry
I think-
versus
but-
2 or 3 acres on agriculture.
So Michael, if I can answer that question.
Yeah,
So
Sure.
when Anna came out, she saw, so I had so the answer to the question is just those few set of trees. I don't clear cut any trees around the property. It's just those clear cut trees. Now those trees, when I showed Anna, I had a burst that knocked down all these trees. I mean, you can see, I mean, the trees are knocked, some of these trees are knocked down by the roots. And Anna was able to see the other parts of the tree. So this wasn't, you're only talking about 5 or 6 trees that were along a pre-existing path that is surrounded by an existing stone wall. So this is not in the middle of the woods. This was an area that was always cleared for years and years and years. Because if you look at when she showed the pictures of those small trees, that's all surrounded by stone walls that connect to the path. So we're only talking about 5 to 7 trees. Okay, that's all we're talking about here along that entire path, and that path is almost a quarter of a mile.
Right. So I look, I think to go back to what Michael is saying, Anna, is it your understanding that the activity that took place was part of, because you showed us this letter from town council, that the activity, if everything was in order with 61A or B, I don't know which one it is. I don't even care at this point.
it's all 61A with different parts, subparts.
Thank you. 61A. That if this was under 61A, that the work that he did would have been covered with the exemptions for maintenance. Is that yes or no?
Maintenance of a road, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, great. So, because what I'm going to say is this, and then honestly, I am not going to spend an hour talking about this damn thing. Okay, enough is enough. What the crux of the situation is, in my mind at least, is this is work that if everything was in order on the exemption, there was a plan that this, or not the exemption, if everything was in order with the chapter 61A, including the plan, that this would have been exempt and we wouldn't be talking about it more. The thing that is the sticking point is the fact with 61AB, I don't care. I'm just saying the town council has said, you can shake your head all you want. Town council has said this would have been exempt as long as everything's in order. That's what they said. So I'm following them, not me and not the rest of you.
Sorry, I want to correct. They said, the thing that I'm looking at from town council is that if it was normal maintenance of land under agricultural use, and I think it's a slightly different thing that it's not maintenance of the land that's under agricultural use, it's access road to it. But I still think.
But you still think, based on your talk with town council, that it would have been exempt?
I do think so, yes.
Because then to me, it becomes an issue. Do we want to make an issue of it? I don't think we should. Do you want to make an issue of it because we're missing the plan, even though he's had it under this protection for a long time? Because it seems to me more administrative. Now, we can ask Mr. Kaplan to go and fix the plan problem and make a contingent on that. I don't know. I mean, my feeling is like, if he's really removing some blown over trees from a roadway, an access way to 61A land, I just don't see it, but so.
As long as the activity, all I'm shaking my head is that I see the legal opinion. The issue is just that, Harley, when you go forward, well, it's that if you're just clearing trees for road access, then that's fine. We don't know whether there's no other tree cutting to be
I
done.
appreciate that.
Is
That's fine.
really, I'm just trying to get practical about going forward, that you don't have a
That's fine.
plan in place, and therefore, and you could do some work maybe around the acreage of agriculture, to the extent that gets marked, that's clear. But it's just a matter of that, fine, just limit the tree cutting to just what's minimally necessary to what's there, to maintaining that road.
And fix your plan issue.
Thank you, Mike. I'll make sure I'll get nothing done. You got it.
Carol, did you want?
And if you don't fix the plan issue, then that means that's a problem, because those 11 acres can't be under that that line
Exactly.
item there. You'd
Exactly.
have to move it to agriculture or something else. But right, you have a separate legal issue about having a plan in place.
Okay.
But just don't do
Carol?
more activity without coming to us. If you're gonna, and if you want to do work of tree cutting in a buffer zone, then just come and talk to us first about whether it's reasonable in the fact that you don't have a plan in place. So don't do any
Thank
more
you.
tree cutting without checking with us about what fits within wetlands protection.
That's fine. And that's what I said to Ann. I said, I don't plan on doing anything unless, Michael, you want to come help me cut down some bushes, but that's up to you.
All right.
So,
Carol, you've got your hand raised. You've been patiently waiting. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, maybe, I don't know if this needs to be said, but again, I would just say that it does kind of matter to some extent whether it's under 61A or 61B, because 61B is explicitly for forestry. It explicitly says there has to be a forest management plan. 61A is for agriculture. That's what he has. I don't know how much it was, maybe I misunderstood, and Mr. Kaplan also has some land under 61B, but we've only been shown 61A. And that this, and I think that's why, as Anna pointed out, this is why town council is saying it's permitted, because this is a road that accesses his agricultural operation. To what Michael said, I think, yes, it's just good standard best practice. If you're going to go out and start logging the rest of your property, then you need to apply for a forestry plan. Well, no, but just to make it clear that if there's no 61B in place with a forestry plan, then you just can't go out and start logging your
Just
property.
to get the terms right, you had it wrong. We're saying it wrong. Chapter 61 alone is forestry. Chapter 61A has agriculture with the ability to do some productive woodlots. And 61B, as Neil had said, is open space and recreation land use. I'm reading from a document that the text they puts out. And that
Well,
you're
that's
reading something
interesting because,
else.
yeah, look at the links there. It might be good for us to educate ourselves.
I'm looking at the
We've
right
given
some
enough
stuff.
guidance here.
In the end, there's distinctions there that maybe everybody's muddied, but the problem is it's just a matter of right. Let's just be careful about what you do going forward.
Thank you.
And get and straighten out what it is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So is everybody comfortable with what we're sort of doing here, which is saying, okay, be careful. If you're going to be doing any cutting in jurisdiction, come talk to us first. Whatever plan, forest management or agriculture, if there's separate plans that are associated with it, just straighten out your paperwork so you don't get into hot water. And then we got cover.
Thanks, Neil.
Okay. All right. Is everybody else, sorry, on the commission, is everybody comfortable with that approach?
As long as nothing was being done there, then that's fine going forward.
Jean, Carol, Courtney, anybody else have any comments, or is everybody okay with this approach?
No comment.
Okay. All right. In that case, I think we're done.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Do we have anything else on the agenda this evening, or are we done? Done.
Yep. We just want to go back to the 45 Maple Street tree cutting for an emergency certification of dangerous trees that I would like to return to. And I don't know if the property owner is on the phone now, but
What's his name?
it's a good question. Mike Winters, I think.
I don't see any mic.
There's an iPhone and a Laura Hartnett, but
it was on the agenda, so I'm just going to proceed with it. So I'm going to share my screen again.
I'll be back in 1 minute.
So this is looking at a mass mapper. This is 45 Maple Street. And the request for me to come and look at dangerous trees has to do with trees that could potentially fall on power lines or potentially fall on the driveway. And I want to show you that either way, whether you're looking at the aerial or you're looking at a GIS, and I can show you the GIS too, but this whole dark area is pretty unequivocally wetland. And I'll show you the GIS base map. It's wetland there in terms of DEP wetlands. So in the field, so the if you see over in the very far lower left corner is the scale. And so, oh, I want to go change base maps here, back to the aerial imagery. So the trees that we're looking at, one is very obviously, right about where my cursor is, very, very obviously in the inner buffer zone. But all of the rest of them are on the far side of the driveway, and I did not delineate the wetland. And so they could be just outside of the outer buffer zone, or they could be within it, but they are where I'm putting my cursor here now, probably within 100 meters of this wetland area, depending on exactly where the edge of that is. I'm going to stop share and share again in a different way. I've got my desktop here. And you can see my desktop, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So here are some photos from, oops. This is the one that's the closest to this. We're looking at the wetland resource area there. This is the one that's to the west of the driveway that is obviously in the inner buffer zone. I'm calling this 2. It's dead. I was counting it as 2. And then we've got some other ones that are on the far side of the driveway. That I'm counting as 3. That is one of the ones, I think it is in the buffer zone, but if there were members of the commission that were uncomfortable with my rough estimate, I can certainly go back there and do a more precise measurement. And they're all dead. They're all in danger of falling towards the driveway or towards power lines. And so I am going to, you know, I am going to take back that any of them are outside the buffer because there's this little stream that I completely didn't mention. So did I stop sharing? I think I stopped sharing. So I am asking you whether I can do an emergency certification for 13 trees that are all I would consider dangerous trees for 45 Maple Street.
Why is it an emergency? How long this? I guess I'm trying to figure out why we're doing this as an emergency.
That's the only way that it's the only tool when people come and say that they're scared that their trees, that these dead trees are going to fall in their driveway. That's the tool that I think of, but I suppose it could be an RDA. It's not an AA because they're not outside of, they are in the buffer zone. So is it an NOI? I mean, we don't have that many tools.
Well, if it's a safety issue, I don't think we're gonna judge whether or not it's dangerous unless it's just not near anything, and then you can. But if you've assessed that it is near a driveway or power lines, then the question becomes, do we issue an emergency cert for it and then have an after the fact NOI? I mean, it looks like some of these trees are right in on, the resource area, right?
Yeah, I'm realizing that, well, actually, you're not looking at right. Some of them are on the resource area. And then some of them are either within the buffer, and then there's an intermittent stream. So they'd be close to that as well.
What do people think?
Gene, right now, Gene's like, we should have dealt with this tree thing. Should have dealt with it.
Yep.
I mean, I agree with you, Neil, that in the past, like we've always treated this as, you know, we don't want to be the ones saying don't cut down the tree, and then tomorrow when the ice storm comes, it falls. Like if it's obviously going to fall on something really important, just consistent with what we've done in the past. I totally understand Michael's question though. You know, considering what is actually an emergency, especially given, you know, DEP feedback.
Yeah. I mean, there's thousands of trees in town like this, or situations like this.
Yeah, and they're calling me.
What I don't want to see happen is that, you know, we issue an EC and then it expires. And
oh,
I also don't want to see Anna in multiple situations waiting for the person to say, okay, I've got a tree person coming out next week. And then she has to, you know, her work isn't done. She has to go back and write the EC, and instead of getting it all done right now. So I think that would be tremendously awkward for you to have to do that in multiple situations, to keep track of all of that. So we did in the past ask people to file determinations for this. So it takes a little longer, you know, but in that way we can condition it. We can say, yeah, you can move them, you can take them down, don't pull the stumps, and please replace them.
Right. I mean, we already got advice that the emergency route is sort of somewhat dubious from the DEP in terms of the fact that that it's not clear cut that they're going to fall tomorrow or within some specified time period. Even though I know there's that issue of a liability of, geez, it falls down the next day, but we have the advice from the last time about overusing the emergency, that's not the way it was supposed to be working for this kind of setting.
And this seems to be an opportunity where it's sort of a gray area, because we're not talking about falling on a house or a play area. This is the driveway and power lines. I mean, power lines. I think there's a danger there, but it is a little bit different than a house or a play area.
So would we do this under, oh, sorry.
They've been standing there in that condition for a couple of years. Or have they lost a lot of limbs already?
Some of them have, yeah.
Right. From the oaks that got killed years ago, they're aging, and they're starting to shed some of the dead branches from the old oaks that were killed by the few years of the gypsy moth, winter moth thing.
I don't like how many of these trees are in the 50-foot and alteration zone. I don't like.
Right.
Yeah.
So even using an RDA, I mean, this comes back to trying to think through what we were trying to do the other time of whether we have what's a permitting process that still goes along with the Wetlands Protection Act. The idea of, I don't know what other towns are doing for all the stuff right next to wetlands, or even stuff that's in wetlands. I guess it would be interesting to what the circuit rider or the DEP people would advise, whether to go to them and say, okay, we can't overuse the emergency. What do you advise as a permitting mechanism? And you could give a few cases of, okay, let's say the tree is in a resource area, but it could actually fall onto a driveway or a power line.
Yep, I can ask Alicia that, absolutely.
As well as check in on what it means to be in the no alteration zone, as well as the outer buffer, to see whether she would have different ideas for the sort of different places. Because even if we used an RDA, I guess an RDA basically is saying that the activity is not going to harm. I guess the language is once we give it a negative determination, saying it's not going to harm the wetlands. All right, as you say, whether we were asking for mitigation as in the thing that you proposed. I think we should be asking for mitigation, a question that Eugene asked at that last meeting that people weren't answering, but I think that mitigation should be part of a this kind of tree cutting.
Anna,
It's a-
what do
yeah.
people think? How about, why doesn't Anna tell this guy to file an RDA?
I would support that.
You can help fill it out.
And what are we going to do? Okay, are we going to feel comfortable with, do we care whether the RDA deals with trees in and out of the 50-foot buffer? Or,
I'd say we have to, because it's not an imminent threat to a person's health and safety, but it is a threat to the property. And so that makes it a circumstance where it's not treated strictly as, if they wanted to remove trees because they wanted to do landscaping, of course, that would be completely different. I'd like to use the RDA because I'd like to be able to condition it with mitigation.
no, I agree with the mitigation and at least kind of conditions about snags and things like that. I guess if you're talking to them about the RDA, since we're going to have to keep working on this, but if they need to do something sooner than later, talk to them about the snag issue. To what extent there's a whole set of them that could be left as snags versus, well, there's also the mitigation option.
Mhm.
And I guess the mitigation doesn't have to be right where the trees are per se. Just thinking about it out loud.
I think that was a decision, and I'm not sure.
Sounds good to me. Thank you. So
Maybe still, I guess it should be, I guess the next agendas are kind of full as to keeping the work on that tree issue.
Yeah, the agenda's full and so am I. I mean, Carol offered to help with it, and
I'm gonna say I haven't gotten to it because I've been so busy, but maybe this weekend I can dig in and get you back some comments, Jean.
okay. I'll send you a friendly reminder.
Yeah.
So we'll start with an RDA and to see whether we can minimize things, leave snags, do some mitigation, just try to minimize the number cut, just to get through something that's responsive in the short run while we think this thing through better.
makes sense to me.
I would point out that we had a snag that we cut a ash tree at about 20-25 feet, and it stood solid for 10 years until we finally had to take it down for septic replacement.
Cool.
Oh, yeah, no, I've got a 30
Very
foot.
stable. Yeah.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
I think you must be watching a movie.
No, I'm reading.
I got his attention when I said that, though.
Yeah.
I like the way you think.
Okay. Did somebody second that?
I did.
You did.
Excellent. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor, Jean?
Aye.
Neil, I, Michael,
Aye.
Carol,
Aye.
Courtney?
Aye.
Fabulous. All right. Christina Colleen, would you like to? Just kidding. All right, everybody, have a good night.